I have a tendency to go quieter during the course of the meeting, so if anyone finds it difficult to hear me as the meeting goes on, then do scream and I'll do my best to speak up. I'm really sorry to drag us all indoors on this absolutely glorious day, but as more serious commentators have observed, it's a phenomenon of which we should possibly be very frightened. Okay, so welcome to this meeting, first meeting of calendar 2019, and I have to report that Councillor Bates, who usually attends our meetings, is unable to be present on this occasion. Can I ask if we have received any apologies for absence, please?
Chairman, there are no apologies submitted. I note that Councillor Topping isn't with us yet today.
I expect to see him in the fullness of time. Does anyone wish to make a declaration of interest? Yes?
There are a few references to the east side of Cambridge and the access plans there. I don't think we're discussing anything relevant, but my place of work is out on that side, so I have an interest.
Thank you very much for making that clear. And yes?
I'd just like to state that I live just off Milton Road, and given some of the discussion that's going to be taking place, that may or may not be relevant.
Right then, thank you very much. Anyone else?
I live on Queen Edith's Way, so when we're talking about the biomedical campus, I may comment about that part of the city.
If we're going to be doing that, I live in Cambridge, and every car that comes into Cambridge is a nuisance. So, and I'm a member of the Cambridge Cycling Campaign.
Right then. Are we all comfortable now? If anything occurs to anyone during the course of any item, then of course feel free to pipe up and make a declaration at that point. Right then, so that takes us to the minutes of the previous meeting, and I'll start by going through them for the sake of accuracy. So we begin on page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4. Yes, Councillor Solomon?
Yes, so on page 5 there is a reference to East West Rail, which I think I asked about. So the officers answered on East West Rail, but the question hasn't been recorded in the minutes. So.
Right. So
I do realise I talked for rather a long time.
You're referring to the 5th bullet point, is it? And you're wondering, you're thinking that perhaps that ought to have been raised under your bullet point questions. Is that?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Do you feel very, very strongly about that, or given that it features in the minutes at the answers, do you want it to be logged as a question?
I would prefer it was on the record that I asked about national strategic infrastructure projects such as East West Rail and the Camcox Expressway.
Okay, members, are we generally willing to accede to that request? Okay, thank you. We'll do that, Councillor Solomon. So that covers pages 4 and 5. Page 6. Yes.
I think both Nikki, Massey, and I raised issue of, instead of working on a £20 million indicative figure for the cost of free or subsidised transport, that we would like to see something worked up that was more than indicative, and I think that should be in the minutes because we'll want to go back to that.
Right then, I also am regularly on that page. Do members agree that's something that we should clarify in the minutes? Nods, yes, all right then. Okay, we'll take that one away too. Page 7. Page 8. Well, I have something on page 8, which is that the reference at the bottom to CCAV 2 should probably be to CCAV 4. So I'm going to correct that. And finally, page 9. Okay, well, those are valuable clarifications, so thank you for members for throwing those up, and on that basis we'll accept the minutes as an accurate record of the previous meeting's deliberations. Okay. That takes us on to questions. We have received 7 public questions and 2 late questions. Those questions have been given the option of a written response or to submit their questions to the Executive Board meeting in 3 weeks' time. All the questions that were received within the deadline have been accepted, and they relate to an item on today's agenda. 2 of them relate to item 7 and the rest to item 11. So I'll call the questioners at those particular items, and feel free to stay where you are to ask your questions, although if you wish to come to the front, then you're welcome to do so. The questions are all assembled and being published, and members should have a copy, and the public, they're also available for the public to see. Okay, that takes us on to petitions, and we have not received any petitions for this meeting. So with all those procedural matters out of the way, we now come to the first substantive item, which is item 6, and in a revolutionary break with our standard procedure, we're giving Niamh top billing on this occasion, so that she doesn't have to sit through the entire meeting and then have the graveyard slot at the end. And similarly, we feel very sorry for Sarah, who also attends to answer financial questions, and hardly anyone ever asks her anything, but here she is as well. So Niamh, over to you.
Thanks so much for the top billing, much appreciated. So the report you have in front of you is a bit different this time. We're setting out the proposed budget for the next financial year. So that looks a bit different. If anyone's got any questions or comments on that, please let Sarah and I know. There's also some good news set out here, which is on page 26 and refers to the work we've been managing on procuring an organisation to run our skills service. We have successfully appointed someone. We weren't allowed to reveal who it was at the point at which these papers were published, but I can now tell you it's a joint partnership between an organisation called Form the Future and Cambridge Regional College, and they will start their 2-year contract, and we're hoping as soon as possible next month. So I think that is really good news. It took a bit longer to get there than we would have liked, but we have got there, which is really good. And again, if anyone's got any questions, do let me know. There's also a very minor error on the front page, which is that the energy infrastructure proposal is in section 16, not section 15. So apologies for that. So that's it from me, Chair, and happy to take any questions or comments.
Right then, Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. It's to do with the cross-city cycle improvements. The report gives the impression, if you look at paragraph 15.7 on page 31, the report gives the impression that these are almost complete, and that there'll be minor alterations and amendments of the schemes roll forward to the next financial year, which starts obviously in March. I have to say they're far from complete. In the Fulbourn Road scheme, we've still got the floating bus stops to do. There's still quite a considerable amount of work there to be done. It seems to have stopped for the moment. There's no sign of it restarting. So there's that. And then on the Fenditton, that is way behind. And again, there's still an awful lot of work to be done on that scheme. So I wouldn't want members to get the impression that these cross-cycle improvements have virtually been completed. They certainly haven't, not the 2 that I know of that are in my division.
Let's take all the questions first, and then we can distribute the answers among officers who are present. So Helen Valentine is next, I think.
Yep, a couple of comments, questions about different aspects of the report. First one was on page 28, 10.3, where it talks about the electronic message boards being used for advertising, and I guess it's a slight concern that if you're coming out of the station, you've taken an example, I use it to decide whether to turn left to go to the bus stops, time critically for a bus that is just about coming, or turn right to go to a taxi, and I wouldn't really appreciate it if there was an advert for something or other that meant that I couldn't in effect use the message boards. The other one is on well, it's about the new homes bonus, where it suggests that the percentage that's going to be allocated from that is reducing, and I wasn't aware of that, and it'd just be interesting to have a perspective on kind of why that is proposed.
Thank you. Councillor Solomon.
Thanks, Chair. So three points I wanted to raise. The page 28, the integrated ticketing opportunities, 13.1. So we're having an updated review of the opportunities. Just when are we going to do something rather than just review opportunities? What's the process that's going to take this forward? Because it seems like a relatively, it should be something that should be pushed forward on quite rapidly and important. And if we just sit around reviewing opportunities, we're going to look a bit silly. Speaking of looking silly, page 30, the numbers don't add up in the revised total budget column, and the change column appears wrong, so just needs fixing. I'm sure the actual budget isn't wrong, but the numbers in the table are wrong. And on the economy and environment, page 34, I just thought it was worth highlighting. We sat through a very good presentation on this working group about this issue of local grid constraints, and one of the key aspects that is perceived to will drive demand is the electrification of transport, and we don't mention that in the report here. So just to make the broader assembly aware of that, really, that all the electrification that we're talking about in the projects we're driving forward is going to contribute to this problem, so it makes sense for us to help solve it as well. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Councillor Massey.
Thank you. I'm on page 27 again, talking about the digital wayfinding. In the September meeting minutes, it's listed that I'd asked about the wayfinders previously, because the one in particular outside Cambridge Station, you couldn't change the language from English, it was just English as the only option, and the map didn't work. So I'm wondering that when we're looking at increasing the number of potential sites where the wayfinders will they be an improved wayfinder, or are they going on the existing model that isn't working as well as it could be? And then I'm on page 28 looking at the pedestrian and cycle sensor trials, in particular when we're talking about Mill Road Bridge that's going to be closed for a short time. I presume that these sensors are going to be looking at the impact of the displaced traffic, but will we also be looking at or trying to find an objective way to look at the impact on local businesses during that time? I think that's it for me.
Yes, I have Councillor Wilson first.
Thank you. I'm on page 32 on the Greenways Quick Wins. Back in July last year, 2018, we had people from these projects come to speak to parish councils in Rampton and Cottenham, and in the case of Rampton, for the Greenway, or the feather into the Greenway from Rampton to the guided busway, the parish council were told that that would start hopefully in the autumn, that money had been earmarked for that, and since then we've heard nothing further. And similarly in Cottenham, for the Cottenham to Oakington cycle path, we were told money had been earmarked for that and agreed, and we haven't heard any more. So what is happening on these projects? Thank you.
Right then, and Councillor Bagent.
going back to Mill Road and the opportunity that the closure of Mill Road presents, because it's going to have an impact, I'd like to see some serious officer time put into planning what we are going to look at. Because, I mean, the impact of the closure of Mill Road is going to be quite crucial to us in knowing what happens when you do get in the way of traffic like that. And it's going to be long enough for people to start to develop a new habit or not have a habit at all. I mean, there's a thing in the Cambridge cycling campaign that talks about the evaporation of traffic, and one would hope that will happen. But I would like to see some officer time spent on what else should we be looking at. We need to qualify it on how much the park and rides start to fill up, if there's any adjustment to the park and rides, if there's a greater use of the park and rides, if traffic is tunnelling its way around the city in different ways. I think that there's a real opportunity, because we can't avoid it. It's going to happen. It's not like there's a hole in the road and suddenly it's coming, and we know it's coming in July. So I think some, as I've said, and I'm going on, aren't I? Yeah, can we spend some serious officer time in planning what we're actually going to look at when this happens?
Right then, any more? You? Yeah, oh sorry, yeah. You can have mine.
Okay, done it, thanks. Going back to the economy and environment papers, Chair, on page 34, this same point that Councillor Solomon mentioned about the possibility of putting some of our money into providing a new substation. I would like he was involved in the discussion in the working group on this when this was discussed in great detail. My recollection of the discussion was that our interest was based on this being treated like a revolving fund in which we would get all of our money back. And the way this is worded here, the cost would be partially offset by the medium to longer term, as we would look to charge potential developers a fee when they are connected to the grid. That wasn't my recollection of the conversation. We were talking about it as a revolving fund, so that our money would be, we would have a route back to the same money we put into it, and we were helping out by intervening, by bringing something forward in time to enable housing to happen. And I think it's kind of important that we do lock down on what that principle is. Otherwise, we end up maybe randomly in doing the investment that should be done by the national grid, when that wasn't, I don't think, the intention.
Okay, any more contributions? In that case, since officers and members have touched on all 5 strands apart from housing and strategic planning, I will speak on behalf of housing and strategic planning and say, just refer to paragraphs 4.3 and 4.4, and that in practice, this means that we already expect to be able to deliver 85% of the target on the basis of currently known sites. And then just a reference to the 5-year land supply. So the change in circumstances in South Cambridge in relation to the 5-year housing land supply means that future contributions towards delivering the target will be solely from affordable housing on rural exception sites or planning permissions granted as a departure from the adopted development plan. And I know members' feelings were very high on those questions when the definition was extended some time ago. Right, so we've had quite a few questions, and we have officers from able to answer appropriately. Given we have our cycling officer here for a later item, I'm going to invite him to speak to answer the questions that were raised on cycle schemes, in particular from Councillor Williams and indeed others.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Mike Davis, hello. So to come to Councillor Williams' points about cross-city cycling, there is an awful lot going on as we speak on all of the cross-city cycling schemes. It may look like they're rather unfinished, but it's often a case of there's a lot of temporary works in place. For instance, Green End Road is closed at the moment. It's being resurfaced, footways, the carriageway and the cycleway, and by next Monday it will be 98% finished, I would say, other than a little bit of landscaping. Fulbourn Road, you're correct. There was a delay with the floating bus stops because we needed some private land from Green King, which we have now secured, so we'll be going back just to finish off the 2 floating bus stops. Fenditton, again, there is a lot of temporary work. We will be completed by the end of May because that's when we told the City Council will reinstate the compound area. And you'll see there is an awful lot of plant and labour on site at the moment. Will be cleared and reinstated by the end of May, but hopefully much sooner. And Arbury Road, we're on site with at the moment. The final phase of that is outside the North Cambridge Academy, and really that piece of work is best done in the school summer holidays, under a complete road closure probably. So we are very close to finishing all of it, and I'm confident that by September everything will be done. Councillor Wilson, yes, I will ensure that we go back to parish councils. Rampton, we're engaging with specialist contractors to see what the best solution is, because we're effectively turning a sort of farm track into a route that's usable all year round for cyclists. So we will give yourself and parish council an update on that. And Oakington to Cottenham, we have a lot of plots of private land. We have appointed somebody to do all of the negotiations for us. We've been doing topographical surveys and sort of preliminary design on that. So again, we'll update yourself and the parish councils with a bit more detail. Thank you, Chair.
And just before I let you off, and are you familiar with the sensor trials, or is someone else going to be able to answer them? And Mill Road, yes. No, Peter will take that. Okay, thanks very much.
Chair, can I just ask the cycling officer, if Arbury Road's going to be closed during the summer holidays, that'll be clashing with the Mill Road Bridge closure, and I think people need to think about if that's a double impact.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's an awful lot going on in the city at any one time. I wouldn't have thought Arbury Road would directly impact on the diversion routes for Mill Road, but you know, those discussions will continue with our colleagues.
Okay, I think that leads into you then, does it, Peter? Answer various other questions.
Yeah, just to pick up on the point regarding the planning around Mill Road closure, so that remit is work is in hand in terms of identifying exactly what we're going to assess. I might have to share that with you if you'd like.
Shall I just pick up a couple on the smart work stream and also on the economy and environment on the energy work? So just on smart, take Helen's point around the digital signs. I'm not close enough to that, but I'll take back your concerns about that and flag that up with the team. Also, the general question about digital wayfinding, then again, I think we need to make sure that those improvements are being fed in, and I'll feed that back to the team and make sure. I know that they had those comments from last time, so I'll just get an assurance to you, Nikki, that has been picked up. And I agree with the two comments that were made about the work that we're doing on the grid. So yes, one of the drivers, it's not just the growth generally, it is electrification that we need for transport. And there's much more work that we need to do around this in terms of the business case, but the intention was that actually we want to use the money that we've got for forward funding, not that it would be a lost investment to us, but it's that developers can't necessarily fund this up front, so that's what we're able to add to it, but it would be looking at a model which we've got to do that work on it, which gives us that money back in due course, so that's the intention.
Right then, so was everything covered about the digital wayfinder? So
yeah,
And the fact that the language can't be changed and things like that, all the... Yeah, okay, great. Sorry, I obviously wasn't paying attention at that point. Were there any other points? Yes.
Helen asked a question about new homes bonus. So we need to do a bit of work on match funding in the next 12 months to understand where each local authority is, basically. So as far as I'm aware, when the deal was originally agreed, there was no firm commitment for the period of the deal on either new homes bonus or Section 106 contributions. But we're doing more work with each constituent local authorities to see what that looks like in the next 12 months.
Okay, and again, I may not have been paying attention. Did anyone answer the question about integrated ticketing?
No, I did not. I mean, on this one, I would say I share your frustration. So it's definitely been looked at before, and I think most of us, we think this should be easy, and it just really isn't. It's about how we're able to work with the operators to achieve that. So I will check what the brief is on this one, but we'll press upon the team that we really do, need to find solutions. But working with operators is critical in being able to achieve that. I think things have moved on since we last looked at it, so hopefully that opens up some further opportunities.
I remember reading the 50-odd page report that we got. I don't know if you've seen that, Councillor Soller, but it's well worth dipping into, because it does go into some detail about what were then perceived to be the challenges, and they took a lot of us by surprise, because we didn't think it was going to be anything like so difficult, but it obviously was. And Niamh, do you want to fill in anything else? You done? No? You're done?
I am done. Thank you.
Yes, you're done. That's great. No, thank you very much. And I hope you appreciate your top billing. And I'm led to believe that it will be every other meeting from now on.
I am also led to believe that.
Yes, right. So yes, we've success. Now,
thank you,
between these papers and the next item, there is the forward plan for the executive board decisions. And I know that the Vice Chairman, Councillor Bick, has a matter he would like to raise.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, there is a matter which I wonder if the Assembly would agree to consider as part of its future forward plan of discussion. So at the moment in the planning system, when planning applications are determined, advice is sought from the Highways Authority, which is the County Council, on their evaluation of the implications of the planning application in relation to the highway. What interests me is how that input is coordinated with the GCP's development of strategic projects, which sometimes can be a step further on than actual known plans in the County Council. And of course, planning decisions have the ability to either enhance or frustrate the ability to deliver strategic projects. And so it is of critical importance to me that the way that the guidance that's given to the two planning authorities does need to reflect, as far as it possibly can, the strategic thinking that's going along with some of the projects that we have. So the question is, could we at some point have an explanation of how those two things are linked up together, so that we can be reassured that there is proper joined up going on, and that we aren't going to miss anything in either side.
Okay, I'm going to hand over to my right.
Well, I think the question was to the Assembly as to whether they wish to see that information. I would just say, we'd be happy to provide it. I don't think it's perhaps a separate report, but we could certainly include it as perhaps an appendix to the next progress report. We are going to great lengths to make those relationships work in the complex partnership environment, but I'm happy to outlay or set out how we're going about that if the Assembly wishes to see it. Yeah. Very
good, thank you. And I'm sure the point will be logged in the minutes, so it won't fall by the wayside. Okay, so thank you, members, for your consideration of that item. That brings us to item 7, which is the future investment strategy. As I said, we have some questions on this item, so we're going to start by hearing those. Then officers are going to respond to the questions, then they're going to give the presentation on the report, and then we can have our debate about it. So, in fact, Angela Chadwyck-Healey is going to answer, so she's going to ask her own question, and indeed the second question on behalf of Dr. Harris, who I am told, well, it's the same similar sort of question, and they're both being taken together. So, are you ready to ask your question?
Yes, I am.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. Specific quantifiable targets are important in order to be able to measure the success of GCP infrastructure investments and policies. The GCP transport aims, as published on the GCP website in February 2019, do not include specific targets for modal shift in transport, but rather are general statements about improvements, quicker and more reliable. While these are worthy aims, they are very general. Does the GCP have specific targets to achieve in order that the degrees of success in meeting these aims can be measured? And if so, can these specific targets be published on the GCP website? For example, are there any specific targets to change the modal share of trips in the region? A specific target might be to achieve a modal share of 25% of all commuter trips by public transport by 2025. And another might be to achieve a modal share of 20% of all trips by bus by 2025, etc. Another example of a specific target could be 90% of journeys by bus to arrive at their end destination within 3 minutes of their scheduled time. So I'm now going straight on to Colin's question, which is very similar. I noted that the GCP transport aims do not include specifics related to achieving modal shift to public transport, but are rather general statements about improvements, quicker and more reliable. While these are worthy aims, they are very general. And does the GCP have any specific targets to achieve for changing modal share across all trips? And if so, please tell me what those specific targets are.
Thank you very much. Good questions.
Thank you for the question. In common with the County Council's previous local transport plan and the current interim combined authority transport plan, there are no modal shift targets that the Greater Cambridge Partnership has adopted. The partnership has adopted an extremely challenging traffic reduction target of 15% on 2011 levels, and certainly information that we've presented to the Joint Assembly and to the board previously, and that's available on the website, demonstrates that actually you need to make changes on all of the sustainable modes to meet that traffic reduction target. I would caveat that by saying that the business case work that we do on all our major projects has to account for the change in transport benefits, and so the transport benefits are by and large reported to the Joint Assembly and to the Executive Board. For example, estimated impact on bus patronage or the like. So that work takes place, but no formal targets have been adopted.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Right. That's the answer to the question. And now we're going to move on to discussing the future investment strategy, and that starts with you, I think, Rachel.
Yeah, just very briefly before I pass to my colleague Isabel, who's just going to introduce the report in a bit more detail. I just wanted to, I suppose, say how important this is for the Assembly to consider. When I came a couple of years ago, one of the criticisms that Assembly members had was that we were only looking at our plans for how we spent City Deal money in the 5-year chunks. What we're trying to do here, and many of you have been involved in the process for getting us to this stage, is ensure that by the time we have our first gateway review, we're not only answering the challenge from government about how we have performed in the first 5 years of funding, but we're able to put in front of them a compelling vision about what we will have achieved by the end of the City Deal period. So this report is important in that context, in that it is the basis on which we will present to government what we think that looks like and what their future investment, should they choose to give it to us, would achieve by the end of that period. So it is an important report for the Assembly and later for the Board to ensure that you're content with how we're delivering on that process as we move forward. So Isabel will just update on where we've got to on the prioritisation process.
Thank you very much.
Cool, thank you. So the Assembly last looked at a paper on the future investment strategy in March, and as Rachel said, this updates it and supports preparations for the Gateway Review. And since it was last considered, we've had further evidence that reinforces the case for the City deal and a transformational solution for Greater Cambridge, including the Spear report last September. The paper sets out the process and the criteria for prioritisation of future investment. And when the City deal was signed, the partnership agreed to use an assurance framework to decide how funding would be spent. And this is largely based on transport objectives within a wider set of strategic objectives. So taking this with our evidence base, it means focusing investment primarily on transport, but with targeted interventions across other areas to maximise the impact on the overall aims of the City deal around growth and prosperity. So in developing the criteria, we have used the assurance framework as a starting point and translated these objectives into more measurable criteria. And we would use these at both a strategic level to determine the programme and at a scheme level to determine specific interventions. At a strategic level, the initial prioritisation reinforces the case for GCP's current work on the key CAM corridors, as well as looking at service provision and other infrastructure investment. And the paper suggests indicative allocations for these projects, which, taken together with existing commitments, take overall spend to £627 million about. There's also a longer list of projects which are kind of put in the paper as still under consideration, and these could be prioritised as further work to identify match funding and to also secure the second two tranches of government grant is undertaken. So I think one of the points is just that it's a document that evolves over time, and as we do this further work, both in developing the projects and securing the funding, we would kind of come back with a full prioritisation, but this is a sort of initial go at it that hopefully tells the story that we need for Gateway Review.
Thank you very much. And just speaking from personal experience, yes, it's supposed to be on. Certainly, I found the work that we did together last year, particularly in the workshops and the joint workshops and the 5 working groups towards refining the future investment strategy, really helpful in providing an overarching framework within which we can all work. And one of the things that I've found myself noticing more, and perhaps it's always been there but I hadn't really been paying attention to it, was that at the start of each item that comes before us in the purpose section, there's a link as to how the particular item relates to Greater Cambridge Partnership overall ambitions. And I think that essence of telling the overall, giving the overall picture, is something that we've been working very hard to get across to the public at large, who have often treated Greater Cambridge Partnership initiatives as single issues, often of great controversy and agitation, whereas they are all part of an overarching scheme with the aim of delivering the ambitions and aspirations to which we signed up in the City Deal Agreement. Okay, so you've had introductions from the officers and the paper is before you, so open to members, and I have first off Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I'd first of all like to share with you the outcome of the consultation that South Cambridgeshire did over its new business plan. And that consultation showed that there was serious concern in South Cambs about transport, and in particular about alternatives to using the car. And that the trips involved weren't trips on the main routes into Cambridge. It was more concerned about alternatives to the car for local trips or trips within South Cambridgeshire, which do not seem to be taken into account by GCP. This document tends to suggest, and from the report from the officer, tends to suggest that GCP is looking at the main commuter routes into the city or to the Biomed campus or to Cambridge Business Park. There's very little effort being looked at into the shorter local trips between the villages in South Cambs, for example. Now, one of the things that South Cambs' new business plan says is that we are very keen to make growth more sustainable. And one of the ways we're doing that is to encourage a business into our villages, away from the city, away from the business parks, and to see more development within our villages and the new towns, such as Northstowe. And therefore, we want to see better, more sustainable work trips to those villages from surrounding villages, if not indeed within those villages and towns. And it seems to me that this strategy doesn't seem to take that into account. I'm very happy to supply you with a copy of the new South Cambs business plan, but you know, we are trying now to move away from encouraging people to commute long distances to go to work in and to in fact disperse work to our local communities to avoid those long commuter trips, and where possible so that people can either walk or cycle to work. And we need infrastructure to do that, as much as infrastructure on the main corridors to take people into the city and to the Biomed campus or the science park. So I would hope that GCP will take note of the new direction of South Cambs. It will certainly be featuring in the new local plan that we're developing, and I hope that GCP will be able to give support to South Cambs' business plan.
Thank you very much. Mr. Walkinshaw.
So a rather shorter question. It's good to have a report that looks forward to the end of the period and brings in the concept of the second gateway review. In looking at that second review in 24-25, are we looking at a gateway that is broadly similar in the way that it will be measured to this one, or are we expected to clear different hurdles at that stage?
Right then. Councillor Massey.
Looking at page 50, 3.6, and we're talking about the second priority being improving the service provision on key routes to make public transport more competitive towards the car. By improving journey time, service frequency and reliability, we should really not forget cost as well, because we are living in the most unequal city in the country. And in a previous meeting, both Councillor Bajan and I both asked, what does free travel or as near to free travel look like? And can we offer this as soon as possible? Has that been included in the indicative allocation of the 75 million in 3.7, where it's 75 million amount of funding to 2031 has been made for this scheme? And I think it's just important to remember that the congestion, we know that congestion is increasing, but we need our public transport to be affordable for everyone. So how far have we got in our discussions with local transport providers on this?
Yes, Councillor Solomon.
Thanks, Chair. So just looking at the table at the top of page 47, under the overall section of that table, the third item down, how does a scheme interact with other schemes, both GCP and non-GCP, and in particular alignment with CPCA schemes? Obviously we had a long pause last year to achieve some alignment on that. What I would suggest that it's worth highlighting the, oh dear, worth highlighting in that, including in the prioritisation, the development around the Camcocks corridor. East West Rail is out to consultation now. as was pointed out under the notes, we have been assured at this assembly that you are aligning with East West Rail and having discussions with East West Rail. The consultation that's come out does include routes via Cambourne and specifically raises the duplication of public transport provision for that area into Cambridge. And so that ties down with the proposed prioritisation, really. To what degree should that corridor, at least, of the CAM corridors be prioritised when there's still uncertainty about the route of such another major bit of infrastructure that's not decided yet?
Right then. Yes, Joe Sainsbury.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions on it. The suggested criteria for prioritisation, I think it's really good to have a clear table like that. The one thing I do think perhaps is missing is something around timescales, so achievability of timescales against the impacts that are suggested. There's a reference in a number of the prioritisation areas to Section 106 and match funding. I'd like to see, I think, in terms of the future, if there's something around what the risks are associated with that, whether that 106 agreement funding would be forthcoming, what the alternatives are if that funding isn't forthcoming, and also what the potential impacts might be on other services. So are we making assumptions that perhaps might impact other services? And then on the last one, I think the list of prioritisations, whilst we know that transport is the major issue, I think there is a need to have some of the references to the other themes within those for a report that is about overall future investment.
Right then. Okay. So, oh yes, sorry, yes, carry on. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah,
just 2 points, thanks, Chair. Just really in terms of process, the criteria, I mean, I back all of the comments that have been made that I think it's good to have the criteria. We've seen some of these before. But under the one that says, is the scheme deliverable, it did make me wonder whether that was in fact combining two very different things. The first is affordability, which I crudely say is, do we have enough money? And the second group is, practicality, risk analysis. I wonder whether keeping those two separate might be helpful, because we might have a really good project that's very low risk in technical terms. We simply don't have the money, and that's very different than a project which is technically extremely risky, and those will get mixed in that evaluation. So I just wonder whether separating those two might be helpful. The second one was, given this is a high-level strategic framing of future priorities, which I think is entirely appropriate at this stage. In the past, I've always found it very useful to say, and therefore the things we are unlikely to do will be the following. So what is the logical inverse of your strategic priority? Just to force clarity as we go into this, that if we do these things, there will be things that will be unlikely or less likely to make the grade, and that then really crystallizes those choices and makes sure we get it right early on. Thank you.
Right then, Councillor Topping.
Is that working? Right, great. So I had 3 questions, one of which is about 3.8, which is the energy capacity issues. So I suppose my question will be, the reference here is you're going to build a grid station, not a power station, but and I guess the question is, given the scale of what industry locally has said is concerned about power, being able to keep pace with growth. It's just whether that 25 million is sufficient, or whether that matches other investment in power capacity. So that's the first question. The second question was perhaps a sort of flagging up what one wouldn't want to see is a sort of unseemly free-for-all for Section 106 payments, because you have the local authorities looking for Section 106 to pay for schools and affordable houses and infrastructure, and I guess there is only so much Section 106 money to go round, so there needs to be almost like a prioritisation there. So I'm interested if we have any perspective on that. And the third point would just be a sort of question. There may be an aspiration for jobs to be in villages, as I think Councillor Williams was saying just now. And I saw a scheme at Sawston, which is last week, which is a business park in Sawston, which has a very sensible transport plan in terms of not just cars, but cycling and access to the train station. However, realistically, quite a lot of the knowledge-based economy, a lot of these startups want to be with other startups, so you get some interplay of ideas and so on, and that's where places like Babram have been so successful. So it may not be realistic to want to have knowledge-based economy startup little hubs in every village because of the economies of scale, and simply because people, business people may not just want to do that. So those are my three question stroke points. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Councillor Bick.
Thanks, Chair. I actually just say I agree with what Councillor Topping has just said. I think there does need to be a bit of a mix, because a lot of the success of industry, business in the area comes from agglomeration, and the businesses that suits won't necessarily be suited by isolated, dotted around settlements. But I think he made the point very well. But the point I wanted to make was about the table, which I too think is very useful and very important, and I just wanted to raise a couple of other points that I wonder what officers' attitude is towards including in this. I mean, one is enabling housing, because right back from the very beginning of the city deal, the purpose wasn't funds to pay for transport for the transport's sake. It was transport as an enabler, and particularly in relation to housing. And I think that it would be good to see that reflected here as one of the criteria in the pack that we've got. And the other point, and I'm thinking this perhaps could be more of a subsidiary point, but needs to be on the surface somewhere, a criteria which suggests that the generation of revenue and enabling the recycling of funds to other GCP purposes needs to be on the table. I mean, we talked about it in relation to the energy substations, and it also arises through some of the other projects that we're talking about. By no means all, and a lot of our big projects that I can't see a way, but it does seem to be an aspect of a scheme or a project which ought to be sort of flagged against the criteria we're using, because something that enables us to afford more out of the money we have certainly ought to have a value.
Right then, anyone else? Okay, so, right, yes, Councillor Kavanagh.
It's great to see, I say, the wide range of projects, and the timelines here and so on. But I'm just thinking, in the light of feedback I and colleagues get from, say, the County Council, for example, about how certain projects happen slowly or don't happen because of the lack of kind of skilled personnel or unskilled personnel to actually do the actual work. I heard a comment the other day that, oh, things will get better once the A14 has been finished, and that will mean there'll be more skilled people in construction and so on back in the market, to use that term. And so I was just thinking to myself, with all these aspirations here, and yes, I take on board there was the mention of the increasing number of apprenticeships and so on, but I think we do need to keep in mind that we do need the skilled people. We've got the money by the look of it, but we need skilled people to actually complete these projects. And the A14 won't be finished that quickly, I don't think.
Well, we're told repeatedly that it's on track for completion as initially scheduled. So, right then. Okay, from my point of view, I'm particularly pleased that in paragraph 2.3 we sign up to some ownership of the implications of the Spear report, because I like the fact that we have pointed out that it establishes a strong shared evidence base for the Greater Cambridge Partnership as much as for the combined authority. And then picking up points which were raised earlier in the discussion of the minutes, at 3.6 there is again this reference to the indicative allocation of at least £20 million a year to deliver radical public transport service improvements, and I'm very keen to be able to substantiate the figure for which I'm partly responsible. Okay, well, that was me. Can I just say, I thought those contributions were absolutely fabulous, members, and I thought that officers will be able to take away some quite good points to feed into the executive board. We will get some answers in a minute, but I'll just summarise some of the things that were mentioned. Councillor Williams drew attention to the South Cambs business plan, and in particular a wish to move towards sustainable growth by encouraging businesses into the villages, and countering that to some extent, Councillor Topping, with a bit of support from Councillor Bick, suggested there are issues of economies of scale, and also that knowledge intensive businesses do like to cluster together, so there's a little bit of face off there. Mr. Walkinshaw was pleased to see a look ahead towards the second gateway review, and wondered whether the sort of criteria at that point would be the same or different from the first gateway review. Councillor Massey in particular was keen for us not to forget the cost of public transport, highlighting that Cambridge is one of the most, or perhaps the most, unequal city in the country. Councillor Solomon drew attention to alignment with East West Rail, and that among the 5 broad route options currently out for informal consultation, a couple of them pass by Camborne, and he wondered whether that had any implications for possible duplication with the Greater Cambridge Partnership scheme. Joe Sainsbury was anxious about the question of timescale amongst the deliverability heading, and section 106 risks, and also I'm glad to hear, don't forget the other themes that the Greater Cambridge Partnership is involved with. Dr. Wells made the interesting point about the fact that perhaps we should separate affordability from other elements of deliverability, because there could be schemes which are very straightforward but are quite out of, they have very little risk, technical risk, but they are too expensive to afford. And he then extended that to say, well, okay, these are the schemes that we think we are going to be able to do, but the inverse is that as a result of choosing these, we have deselected these others. And Councillor Topping had some questions about grid reinforcement. I've touched on the economies of scale, and he did warn against free-for-all scramble in the section 106 payments from developments which are of limited largesse, even at the best of times. And Councillor Bick wants to highlight that enabling housing should feature in the table of criteria, and Councillor Kavanagh pointed out that many of these schemes require capacity. Well, they raise capacity issues, and they need the people with the skills to deliver them. So, officers, some very good questions.
Thank you. Yes, thanks for those. Where people are flagging up some suggestions around the table and clarification of some of the criteria, I think we just take those away because they all seemed very helpful and sensible, so we will reflect on those. On the question about the criteria for the second gateway, yes, it does change. Whilst at the first gateway, it's very much about whether we are delivering what we said we were going to do on time and to budget. By the time we get to the second gateway review, then the intention would be that they are starting to look at more of the economic indicators that City Deal was set up to achieve economic growth. There's no yet detail about exactly how they would do that, but by that point in our journey, they would be wanting to understand what impact we've had in economic growth terms. To go to Councillor Williams' challenge, be really keen to see the document from South Cams. I'm not aware that we've had that, so that would be really helpful. I think it's important to flag, though, that we can't necessarily, in terms of the transport strategy, achieve everything that we would want to achieve for Greater Cambridge, because although the money does sound like a lot, as this report outlines, it's quite easy to spend it, and we have got to focus on the priorities and about getting people from their homes to jobs. And so the nature of our strategy is driven, as you've seen in previous papers, about those routes that have the biggest commuter numbers on them. That doesn't mean to say that I don't think some of your challenge is covered, though, in these draft criteria, because when we're talking about service improvements, that it would be intended to very much be having a conversation with South Cams about different route options, and the consultation engagement process that we launched yesterday on choices for better journeys. We are deliberately sort of setting out options that we want to hear people's views on, and as you know, some of those are about raising money that would enable more of an investment in public transport. I think if they are the choices that people make later on, there would be more money to invest in being able to provide a better range of options for the rural areas. So that is definitely not forgotten about, but with the money we've got, I think there is a need to prioritise on the most heavily used commuter routes. And linking also on that same point to Councillor Massey's question on fares, on the engagement we launched yesterday, we're deliberately asking questions about people's appetite to see reduced fares as to how much they would want to prioritise that if we did go down the route of having schemes that generated additional revenue to spend on public transport. So I think we're all interested to see what response we get from the public, but fares has been included in that process. In terms of Councillor Solom's question on the alignment and avoiding duplication with other sort of strategic transport interventions, I agree in principle about the table, that we could make that clearer. I think there's a debate for another place about that specific challenge on East West Rail, where I think there is a good justification about why our scheme is about the current planned growth. East West Rail is about the longer term future growth and is not going to be delivered in the timescales required for the current recently adopted local plan. Councillor Topping, on the energy capacity, is it sufficient? We did talk about this a little bit under the previous item, and the Economy and Environment Working Group had a really detailed report from consultants on different options, and actually the one that the working group thought was the one that we should invest in is the one that you're now seeing in the papers. But actually there's a discussion that we're also taking on with the Combined Authority about a wider set of challenges and interventions that would perhaps be more appropriate for them, whereas this was something that could be particularly aligned to supporting the growth required in Greater Cambridge. So that's why we were picking on that, but there is a more detailed report if you are interested to see it. I also agree that we can pick up that point generally about how we can be using our resources for forward funding and for recycling. I think that is a theme that is emerging in some of the debates that we're having across the area. So I think that is something that we could helpfully pick up as part of the future investment strategy. And I agree with Councillor Kavanagh that when we get to delivery, which everybody is anxious that we start to do, there will be an issue about the skills to do that, and that's a challenge that we are starting to plan for as we get nearer to delivering on some of these schemes. But I think that is an issue for us and probably the UK more generally. I think I've covered everything.
Yes, I think you've covered everything. Members, does anyone feel aggrieved that something was left out? No. Well, I thought it was a wonderful, very full discussion, and I wait to see whether the Executive Board gives it as good a treatment as we've just given it. So thank you very much for setting a very good example again, members. And that takes us to item 8, which is the A10 Foxton level crossing bypass and parking at Foxton rail station. We're going to receive a presentation from the officer on my right, and over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Members may recall that the Executive Board took a decision last February to review a couple of potential projects within the Foxton area. One was dealing with the issue of the level crossing, and the other was the potential for a rail station parking and a travel hub type feature given the growth on the rail network within the Foxton area. So the short paper tries to outline the position that we've arrived at on the two particular projects. In terms of the level crossing, that a bypass can be built. I think what the paper doesn't clearly articulate is it's likely to be a bridge on the costs rather than a tunnel. Nevertheless, a bypass can be built at a cost of circa 20 to 25 million pounds. It delivers some benefits on that local part of the network. Those benefits contribute to wider traffic growth in the area. And then I think what the paper then leads on is to suggest, well, you're dealing with part of a strategic route and not all of the strategic route, and it may be more sensible to look at the route from end to end. Certainly there are aspirations in other areas within our geography, such as Holson and Hawkston around bypasses, and that may very well be a conversation that needs to be taken place together rather than a sort of more piecemeal approach. In terms of parking in the travel hub, and just for clarity, there's a map in there that shows areas where we've assessed sites. They are purely indicative, and if we were taking it forward, that would be subject to a whole host of discussion and consultation with local residents. But what it is suggesting is that given the growth of rail passengers in the area, and particularly linked to Cambridge South's development, actually there may very well be a pressing need for parking in the area, because if parking is not effectively managed, then as we know to our cost in many villages, parking will just simply take place in a more disorderly fashion. So the paper does suggest that actually incremental growth on a parking and travel hub capacity in the area may very well offer some benefits to the area, but the Executive Board may very well want to undertake public consultation on that idea and some of the principles later this year. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you very much. Members, for those of you who like me may have found the illustrations on pages 53 and 54 a little bit difficult to read, we do have some large format copies, and I hope there is at least one for each row, and we have a few spares at the front if you want to just flag up, and they'll be brought to you. So, okay, you'd like one. Right then. Does anyone want to speak about the item? Yes, right, yes. Mr. Williams, Dr. Williams, sorry.
So thank you, Peter. So I quite like the report. I remember it came up last January or February, and I bemoaned it really at the time. I think it was part of something I don't like, which is these small rural travel hubs, which I'll return to later. And on this one, I think my point was either do it or don't do it. So I think having a large park and ride at Foxton is to me a sort of binary decision. There's no point having somewhere for 30, 40, 50 cars. Either you do it or you don't do it. And I think this document spells it out quite well. And therefore I welcome the document as it is. It definitely needs to go to consultation. The only thing that's nagging in the back of my mind, and I wonder if Councillor Topping might pick up on it, is just a lack of feedback we've had from local residents. I mean, usually it's the other way around, local residents, isn't it? That any scheme that comes forward generates quite a lot of interest and debate. I'm nervous that we haven't had a lot of that, either from our Hawkston and Harston residents who I've come to know, or from residents around Foxton. And I'm hoping that they will be nicely consulted and feel part of the process moving forward, although the options look a logical discussion to have with them.
Thank you. Well, that's a perfect cue to bring in Councillor Topping.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I could say that the good people of Foxton are far more civilised than many other villages, but I won't, because so I want to give some credit to the officers of the Greater Cambridge Partnership, because one of the things that's happened over the last month or so was that there has been a discussion with the chair of Foxton Parish Council and officers, and actually, although Whittlesford were sort of up in arms about the rural travel hub that was proposed for Whittlesford, and were very vocal in their commentary, as indeed was I. But nevertheless, the project officer for that scheme has also sort of been quite good at reaching out into the community. But I think the point is well made that you know, this proposition would be quite a significant, if not fundamental, change for Foxton, and that need for consultation is pretty important. I mean, I think that given the scale of economic development in the south of South Cambridgeshire over the next sort of 10, 15, 20 years, anomalies like the barriers at Foxton are just going to have to be sorted out. And I note that the report says that you can sort out the Foxton crossing, and you can do a park and train independently of each other, but there needs to be a coherent package, and I think if it's dealt with sensibly in terms of consultation, I think there is every chance that this could be one of the better schemes that the Greater Cambridge Partnership comes forward with. So I live in hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bagent, yes.
16,000 vehicles going up to 22,000 vehicles, and then the increase of growth because it's flowing well, all going through a couple more villages and ending up presumably in Cambridge. I fully understand the reason why people that want to drive into Cambridge quicker might fully support this idea. But the anomaly of the crossing, as my colleague says, maybe is quite a good idea. I wonder what we're doing actually as a GCP, whose intention in part is to reduce the amount of traffic coming into Cambridge in removing the 20-minute wait on that route, and not, now that we're going to have a Cambridge South, we've got a Cambridge North, and we've still got a Cambridge Central, not actually enjoying the fact that the anomaly is there. We will be, in some way or other, restricting traffic coming into the city. Why should we be doing it there? We have this holdback here. If we built a large travel hub and really worked hard at getting people out of their cars and getting them onto the train, then we could stop, I don't know what the percentage would be, but a number of these 22,000 plus cars from heading towards the city. I think that we need to take a serious rethink. I wasn't here in the meeting in January. I think this is something that we really need to pause and think about. We are encouraging cars to come into Cambridge. And we will be, at some time, trying to divert those cars from coming into Cambridge when they get further up the line. This is a good place to stop them.
Right then, Dr. Wells.
I'm on much the same lines, actually. So my attention was drawn to, so paragraph 4.1 says the two schemes are essentially independent, which as drawn, and I know it's somewhat schematic, I don't really agree with. Clearly the issue being, in the provision of the park areas, either they're shown schematically, except as presumably logically connecting off the bypass, which if you haven't built the bypass is problematic. So option 1 looks like it would logically be fed from the bypass road. Or option 4A or option 5, for example, are close to the existing crossing. So if you haven't addressed the crossing, you will have a wonderful park and ride, but the entrance to and the exit from it will be blocked by the queuing traffic at the level crossing. So I don't think they are independent. That's my concern, is that they're not independent. It would be great if we could envisage a system in which they were independent, because in that event, then you can open up the prospect, exactly as Councillor Bagent has said, which is you put in a park and ride, you don't address the level crossing, because you believe, you aspire to the fact that you can get enough modal shift before the level crossing, using the park and ride, to obviate the need to spend the money on the bridge, which is, as has been said, only encourages traffic going on to another park and ride further up the road, effectively. So I think thinking through those optionalities would be very useful, and I just worry at the moment that they're not actually independent, and therefore we don't have that optionality as it's being presented.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kavanagh.
Yeah, I'm in this discussion. I'm keeping in mind the much praised success of having the cycleway nearly completed along the A10, which currently goes through this level crossing, and it seems to me that the cyclists and their needs down that route, need to be kept to the forefront of the thinking, because my impression is, and I don't think there's much in disagreement of it, the number of people cycling not just towards Cambridge and away from Cambridge, but also being connected to the settlements around Foxton and so on, they're going to increase, and they will be requiring segregated cycle routes and so on. So I think the investment in the bridge is not only going to be good for addressing the problem of the level crossing, which is, it is a major problem, and then it's going to get worse with the predicted increase in the number of vehicles and so on. But the bridge, when it's built, if it takes into account that you're going to have a segregated cycleway across it as well, it's going to really enhance the experience of those who are willing to get on a bike and cycle to and from work, or cycle for leisure. So I think that must be kept in mind. The other thing I think also needs to be kept in mind is Papworth Hospital is moving onto the biomedical campus, and as we know, Papworth Hospital, it's heart surgery and so on. So emergency vehicles, I presume they might have alternative routes at the moment if they have to go along the A10, because it must be creating some very, very anxious moments for people if if they're in an ambulance and they're heading towards Addenbrooke's at the moment, but when you've got Papworth, which is operating there, as we know, seconds, minutes counts when it comes to heart surgery. You won't want ambulances getting caught up in what is really a 20th century or 19th century device there, a level crossing, with loads of traffic impeding the progress of emergency vehicles. So two things there, emergency vehicles and the needs of the cyclists. And the bridge.
Yes, a sobering thought. Mr. Wilkinson.
Just to pick up on that point, a lot of this is about capacity. We read in the later report about the 17,500 extra journeys come by car unless we provide alternatives just to do with the biomedical campus over the next 10 years or so. And I think we ignore that at our peril. I think Foxton is a tremendous opportunity to establish park and rail, so I find that a very compelling argument in the article here to get people out of their cars earlier, even if there is another park and ride further up for those who are accessing from another area. Another factor which I'm surprised not to see in here, because I've only become aware of it more recently, maybe I've missed the point, but I believe that railway crossings are themselves heavily restrict the number of trains that can use the track. So we actually reduce the capacity of the rail line by leaving a level crossing in place. I think that is a restricting factor on trains coming through the north of the city via Fen Road. So I think that's another factor we're perhaps overlooking in this paper.
Right then. Councillor Solomon.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bagent raised the vehicle movements, paragraph 2.3 and paragraph 2.7. So it's 16,000 vehicles per 12-hour period, and then in 2.7 rising to 22,000 vehicles over a 24-hour period. So just a clarification. It was both 24-hour. Thank you. And if Councillor Bagent will forgive me for speaking up for my residents, it was raised. I do represent Harston as well. I think they are welcoming of this kind of intervention to take the traffic off the road through Harston, that earlier intervention, and are concerned about the removal of the potential removal of the level crossing, which actually allows them the ability to get out of their side streets and driveways at the moment when it goes down. A couple of points. At the moment, it feels like it's and maybe it's just because of where it's come from, it feels like it's very much talked about as a car park rather than a hub. And so if this goes forward, bringing more of that hub thinking into it, how the service provision goes into it for cycling, as well for people that want to cycle to the station more easily from the surrounding villages. What kind of bus services would go into that hub and out of that hub, as well as the rail services. And then the other thing, and I promise that I'm not trying to work it into every single item, but I wondered what the impact of East-West Rail is going to be on this one, because I know that the potential is for joining in the vicinity of Foxton. If it is below where the level crossing is, I would imagine it's inconceivable that crossing could continue to operate with that volume of train traffic in. So how this interacts with East-West Rail thinking, again, is something to bear in mind, it would seem. Thank you.
Right then. Anyone else? Oh yes, Helen Valentine.
Just briefly, excuse me, I've been very supportive, I think, of both of these developments. If they are genuinely independent of each other, then it seems to me that the park and rail would need to come before the bypass. But I think, frankly, we should get on with both of them as quickly as we can.
Right then.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll try and pick up on the questions, and if I miss one of the comments, then please come back. So in terms of Councillor Solomon, the East-West Rail is an entirely fair challenge. There would be significant implications in this area if this route, the sort of route was chosen, and we'd have to review that in any case. In terms of Christopher's point on the limitation, we're not currently told it's a limitation at this location. Level crossings generally do, but not at this location. That may well, of course, change, and it will certainly be an absolute game changer if East-West Rail comes in that area. It's a fair challenge, again, I think, around a car park and a travel hub. So certainly in the short term, I think we're talking about a car park with cycling facilities and bus stopping facilities. It does feed into the conversation that we started yesterday around the public transport offer as to what the public transport services would look like going forward, because clearly we would need to guarantee that sort of level of provision there. Similarly, I think in terms of John Wells's point, it's an entirely fair challenge around whether it's one scheme or two. One of the reasons why I was at pains to say it's illustrative is because the challenge that we've got is how can the car parking be delivered so that people don't get caught up in the traffic, and that may well link that the car parking is slightly further out, but that in of itself might not put people off because otherwise they're going to sit in a queue. I think we're clear on the complementary nature of the park and ride car parking capacity here and at junction 11 Trumpington, because of course it's a different offer, it's a rail and a bus offer. A lot of people may well be going to the biomedical campus when the Cambridge South Station is built, but they're going there by a different mode. Equally, you get access to other parts of the country and on this. I think I've tried to pick up on most of the questions. The comments, I think, in terms of from and support are down for members to give a view.
Okay. Thank you. Yes. Well, a range of views, I think, would be a fair summary of that, and I'll try my best to present both sides of the story when I take the item to the Executive Board in 3 weeks' time. Obviously, there are those who feel this should be done as quickly as possible, and others who feel that actually it's quite an effective brake on traffic flowing into Cambridge. So those are positions which are mutually incompatible, and over to the Executive Board to sort that one out, I think. Right then. Okay, so over to item 9, which is the Cambridge Biomedical Campus Transport Needs Review, and we've touched on, there have been some reference to this already. The papers are in front of us, and we're going to start again with a presentation from Peter.
Thank you, Chair. This is a very comprehensive report. Matthew, who led it, was sat there a moment ago from County Council colleagues, has done very well delivering this, but accepting that not all of this is all terribly comfortable reading. I think the task that was set by the Executive Board some 18 months ago now was really bring to life what the transport challenge is, and give us some clear indications on what the way forward. What are the key interventions we need to look at, and what else do we need to do as a group of partners on the site? So the report is essentially broken down into 3 elements, which is the period from now to sort of 2022 in terms of the projected growth and the impact on the area, the period from 2022 beyond to 2031, and that break is largely determined by the ability of the partnership to deliver some of the larger interventions, which we know will have an impact on this. And then finally, an assessment of what those interventions will do to traffic and transportation in the area. So what the paper and the appendices certainly available on the website point out is that there is an increase in traffic and travel in the period up to 2022 that we collectively need to work out how we're going to manage. And that's something that the biomedical campus partners have been incredibly positively involved in this, are committed to working with GCP and the other statutory agencies to dealing with that, and I think the paper is saying that we really need to be looking at what further, because there's an awful lot already gone on, what further short-term interventions can come forward. What the paper then goes on to say is that actually the key interventions that the GCP is developing are incredibly important to the biomedical campus site. And not to put too fine a point on it, the report basically says we need to get on with it and deliver these things so that it can have a particular impact in terms of relieving some of the potential issues here. It particularly makes the case for Cambridge South Station And you'll know with a separate hat on, we're working with Combined Authority and government on developing that scheme, and a lot of the information in this will feed directly into that in terms of the size and the scale of the benefit that Cambridge South Station will take with that forward. It says if all those interventions are brought forward, then actually we deal with the traffic and transportation issues within the area. But given the continued success of Greater Cambridge and the continued success of the site, we can't take our foot off the accelerator. So we will continue to need to work as a group of partners to deal with the issues, particularly around the car parking, both on and off the site. And there are particular issues around the residential areas that we need to work through what that looks like, but that we need to come forward with a package of proposals that complements GCP's existing plan to try and deal with the issues that this report raises. And I'll stop there, Chair, because I know there'll be plenty of views on this.
Thank you very much. Right then. I think, Eileen, you were just first, so Councillor Wilson and then Councillor Massey.
Thank you. I've got a couple of points. At the moment, the most convenient way to get to the biomedical campus from the northern villages is by car, because any links that we did have up to a few years ago have been taken away. We used to be able to get there from the Milton Park and Ride when it went straight through to Addenbrooks. We used to be able to get there on the City 8 bus until that was curtailed in the centre of Cambridge. So now the only reliable way of getting to the biomedical campus is to drive, so that increases transport. You mentioned Cambridge South Station. Cambridge South Station would be a wonderful option for people from the northern villages, if people from the northern villages could actually get to a station without driving. So again, all of this needs to be included in the responses to the consultation on the better journeys, because otherwise we'll still have people who have appointments to meet at particular times having to drive in order to make sure they meet those appointments, and even that takes a long time, because once you get to the biomedical campus you can spend quite a long time trying to park, but even that is quicker than using public transport. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Massey.
So if I'm right, this is a 5-year project, is that correct? Yeah. Okay. And key partners have had the full involvement, but in addition I do think that CUH and the biomedical campus need to invest in this more so, perhaps with a committed lead CUH officer, considering that it's the growth of their site that is mostly the cause of the projection of the increase in car journeys from 30,000 to 46,000 by 2030, and that really is unacceptable. So we do need a bit more support from them, I feel. And we need basic measures like cycle-friendly roads on the campus, and better walking routes and signage around the site. The pick-up and drop-off zone in front of the hospital at the moment is a nightmare. Even now, and causes traffic jams for some buses. So, I mean, we could be trying to sort something out maybe now for that. We need better links to the Park and Ride, perhaps a shuttle bus between Babraham and Trumpington Park and Ride that would make a huge difference, especially given the lack of parking for staff. And we want to encourage patients and visitors to travel to the site for the most part by public transport as well, so that might help. I do quite like some of the ideas in the appendix, so I'm just going to pick up on some of the things there. The good ideas including the season ticket loans for staff. More so, the subsidised travel for staff is important given the average salary of healthcare assistants and cleaners, etc. Yes, bus station reconfiguration is needed, and I welcome the look of the idea of looking at the bus times to make sure that actually it works for people working on site, because we know it currently doesn't. I would not be in favour of reviewing visiting times to avoid peak hours, because visiting times are for patients. And we need to take into account the times that people are able to visit their relatives in hospital. Generally is after work, and if we were to change that, we're going to affect people's lives and the patients, and that's something we should be avoiding. But I do think that we should be looking at avoiding non-essential deliveries outside of peak hours now, not in the future, but we should be doing this across all businesses.
Thank you very much. Helen Valentine.
I read the reports in the papers and a goodly fraction of the 300 plus pages that there was a link to. I think it's a really good, very thorough report. It is truly scary for that part of Cambridge. The volumes are huge. It seems to me that Cambridge South is absolutely essential. It will be a disaster without that, but that's clearly a number of years away, and things are going to get significantly worse before they get better. The point that I did want to make, that I think the report underplays the role of cycling, particularly from the east and southeast of the campus. It's quite good along Hills Road. It's not too bad along Long Road. It's not too bad across the fields, but it's pretty awful from Queen Edith's Way, where I live, Wolfston Way, Nightingale Avenue, and there's very little reference to the need to upgrade those cycle routes in, and I'm not sure that'll make a huge difference. It's only going to resolve the problem, but everything that we can possibly do is going to be necessary, I think, to help.
Mr. Wilkinshaw.
Like others, I welcome the report. I think it's really useful to bring it together and perhaps to illustrate so clearly in one part of the city the scale of the problem that we've got. These numbers are enormous, and it's right now, it's not in 5 years' time. Most of those big movements are happening immediately. My question really is closer perhaps to Councillor Wilson's question around, do we know where people are coming from? All these interventions we've talked about here are right there on the site, yet most of the people trying to get there are trying to get there from a distance, not all of them just from the city and immediately in South Cambs. To get round from the north and east side to the Biomedical campus is very difficult. I have to do quite a roundabout twice a day, so I see a lot of the traffic heading that way. So I don't know whether we've done any analysis on those 17,500, 18,000 extra journeys by car if we don't achieve it, where they're coming from and how people will get into alternative routes.
Thank you very much. Dr. Williams.
Don't often get called Dr. Williams. It's one of my pet hates that John always gets called Doctor and I don't. But thank you, thank you, Tim. Goodness, where to start? So I start by welcoming the study. I mean, it is long overdue. We say that many things GCP. If we'd done this 5 years ago, then we'd be in a better place. But it is really good. And I just want to reassure everybody, 2.2, the study has been developed with key partners, and the level of stakeholder involvement in the study is incredibly positive. And I think the partners do take it seriously. They are investing where they can. I think we have to bear in mind that most of the people on the campus are actually from the hospital. And it's easy to ask hospital people to invest more in key workers and subsidising staff, but that's basically, you have to think of where the money's going to come from an NHS perspective. But we can all aspire to that. I think the scary thing for me now is obviously in the short term, and I think although we have excellent engagement with CBC partners, an excellent travel plan, the short-term problems are quite large, and perhaps we haven't engaged the local residents as much, and I know, Peter, you're planning to meet with local residents as well, and they have some thoughts on what could be done. And I think really what this shows, I think we've already got GCP and CBC partners working together as a team, frankly, because it's the only way we're going to get through this. If we could draw in the residents in a similar supportive way, I think that would be an advantage, particularly of these very short-term initiatives. More often it's just that local view which gives you something. I don't know the gentleman who did the report, but I have to congratulate him, particularly on page 88, which is the Consolidated Integrated Scheme Impact Analysis. What a wonderful thing. It's the sort of thing I'd be proud of having generated, so whoever's generated this should get a lot of credit. It tells us lots of things. One thing it tells us, we often hear at Assembly, and actually people who are interested in work at the Assembly, is if we're going to do Initiative X, does that mean we don't have to do Initiative Y or Initiative Z? And many times officers have told us, no, it all has to come together if we're going to be successful. So just doing one initiative isn't going to work. It really needs to be an integrated plan. And I think this graph shows that beautifully. We see the impact of various interventions. And even if you don't agree with some of the numbers or some of it, it gives us something to really tangible to challenge. Will Scheme X have impact Y? But I'll still come back to where I started with. I have a horrible feeling we're going to be close to that blue line, which is the one going up, Peter, than the ones going down for quite a while. And that has an impact, not just actually for the Biomedical campus, but Eileen says everybody across Cambridge, because everybody comes across Cambridge to Biomedical campus. But one fallacy, just so you know, is there isn't any car parking. Everyone can come by car if they want to, but they actually can't get onto the campus. So just an example, AstraZeneca will have no allocated car parking for staff on a permanent basis. People will be able to get parking spaces a few days a year, but the rest of the time they're going to come from North Cambridge and just circle around unless an alternative is found. And actually, I think there's car parking for about 20 to 30% of people who come onto the campus. That's one of the challenges we face. Oh, and we do know how all 17,500 are, and we know how they want to get there.
Yes, I also found this diagram on page 88 particularly informative and illustrative, and picture tells 1,000 words, and so it'll be good for all of us to bear this in mind, and indeed to watch its evolution as the short-term interventions, as much as they can, help to mitigate the scary short-term impact that has just been referred to. Okay, Dr. Wells.
Did you do that just to wind them up? Great. Thank you, Chair. I had 3 points. I mean, the first thing I want to do absolutely is to welcome the report, as Dr. Williams said. You know, if only we'd done this 5 years ago, but we are where we are. So I think it's a really good piece of work. It pulls together lots of threads, and I think it's quantitative, and a picture says 1,000 words at the end of it. So I think that's entirely to be welcomed. Going through the time structures, I did reflect that in the short term, I believe there are a lot of things that could be done quite simply and quite inexpensively that would help. I'm not pretending they would change the world, but they would help. So, for example, if you go today to the Addenbrooke's website on how to get here, under parking, it says we have 2 car parks. It doesn't say the best thing to do is to go to the park and ride, but if that's not convenient for some reason, why don't you come to an on-site car park? It doesn't mention park and ride on their main parking website. It's a sub-tab that you have to sort of work to get to. So communications of where is the parking, a very good point about where do I go and catch a bus? I worked on the campus for 9 years. I never knew which bus stop to go to get a bus. It was never very clear. That's really simple stuff, very quick, that would help in the short term. So I think there's a lot of that sort, and way marking and things of that sort. So I would really encourage the campus to push on that, because it can address the short term. Thinking more about the long term, I think I think this report is encouraging in the sense that it does illustrate a joint working between the campus, the partnership, and others, and that is absolutely welcomed. My concern is that we need to make sure that continues. The campus is very complicated. It has many, many stakeholders. It's not the hospital. It is many partners, university, hospital, two hospital trusts. The Papworth Trust is not the same legal entity as the Addenbrooke's Trust. And the coordination of it, not to forget AstraZeneca, ABCAM, and others coming on site. So the coordination of that has been difficult in the past and will need continued effort. And I think it's to be encouraged that we've made some steps and we need to continue on that. In regard to the long-term options, it's great to have 47 medium-term interventions. But for that to get traction in the next stage, there's got to be a prioritization. But crucially, I think we need to think very carefully about accountabilities. So to pick up an early point, we need to be clear about, is this something the campus should be doing of its own accord or leading on, with perhaps support from others? Or is this a strategic, if you like, intervention, the partnership that is tied to the biomedical campus. If the campus is clear that it's being asked to lead on something, and of course lead and or fund, those two may be slightly different, then it puts the challenge in their court to agree within the campus how the costs or the leadership or the resourcing of that initiative is going to be taken forward. If we leave it, I know you're not suggesting we do, but if we were to leave it as 47 bright ideas without that laser precision accountability, then nothing will get done. And to some degree, I suspect the reason things haven't largely been done in the last few years has been something about that clarity. It's too easy to think that someone else is going to solve the problem for you. So I think that to me would be the driving thing about those medium to longer term interventions, really get clear on all of that accountability and governance. The third thing, by way of curiosity, was that I started doing some sums, which is always dangerous. And I know this is, I will preface this by saying it's not a completely fair comparison, but if you take your 28,475 journeys today, that is 7.5 million a year, roughly. If you take it to 2031, it becomes 12 million per year, roughly. Car journeys, or 67,000 visitors a day becomes 17 million per year. Stansted Airport flies 20 million people a year. How many people and what resource is put into thinking through the parking, the transport, the location of long, short stay, middle stay, pick up and kiss, or whatever, combinations, and the flow through the airport? What effort is put into that in a Stansted Airport? And actually, my observation is, and I know this is a terribly crude comparison, but by 2031, the biomedical campus will be broadly of the same scale of transport, demand, transport, mode shifting transport infrastructure as Stansted Airport, just without the planes. And so I think we need to recognize this. Well, maybe we should have some shops, I don't know. But yeah, so there is a scale and reality about this that I think does say it needs really serious attention over many years to get this right. So we've taken a first step. I think that's great, and I look forward to hearing future progress.
Yes, I think even in a no-deal Brexit, it would be difficult for Addenbrooke's to lay claim to be able to offer duty-free shopping. Councillor Kavanagh.
Yeah, it's good to see on page 66, the interventions, the emphasis on the need for cycle parking. We know you just cannot have enough cycle parking, secure cycle parking. But on that page, there's also, right there on number 7, there's a reference to the cycle route to Shelford. Now, from my experience, I noticed Jim Chisholm's here. I don't think it is on the plan, is it? But I think it really needs widening very soon. And I mention that now in the light of the way it takes a great deal of time to get permission from landowners. We're going on to look at the Chisholm Trail later on. And getting the permission from landowners does slow up things. So if there is a plan to widen the cycle route from Shelford, which I would fully endorse because it is needed now. I mean, there's cavalcades of cyclists along there. Not just during peak times, but leisure cyclists at weekends. So I put that down as a recommendation. And a short-term intervention I'd recommend is, we've been sitting here for nearly 2 hours. I was just wondering if we could have a 5-minute break.
Well, we were coming to that. Yes, you're not the only person to have made that suggestion. So shall we wrap up this item first and then perhaps take a short break? Okay, I I have Councillor Solomon, then Heather Richards, then Councillor Topping, then Councillor Big, and then we'll let the officer wrap up, and then we'll take a short break. Is that okay, members? Right then, so Councillor Solomon.
Thank you, Chair. I would very much echo the points Dr. Wells has made actually about the prioritisation. That was the main thing that I wanted to raise, the prioritisation and the accountability, because 47 is a lot, and it's good to have clarity on who's going to deliver what there and with what urgency. So just a couple of specific points. In Appendix C on page 82, the review of access to key origin stations, we don't seem to have included any of the Liverpool Street line in the list there. I don't know if we've thought about that branch. And then on this wonderful chart on page 88, the CAM baseline impact is pointed out, and the CAM maximum impact is pointed out. It's very clear what the CAM maximum impact is, and question marks over whether it's achievable, but there doesn't seem to be any difference in the gradient between the CAM baseline impact going on and the do nothing. So does CAM not do anything? Thank you.
Very good. Heather Richards.
Thank you. I'm going to reiterate a comment that's been made a couple of times about providing data on the journey originations. I just think as an assembly member looking at the data, surely the impact of some of the proposed interventions is going to be dependent on where the journeys are coming from and the reason that they're being taken. So if that data is available, I think that's really useful. The second is following on from some of the comments around prioritization. It's great to see a list of all 47 things there, but I think in addition to the benefits, it would be interesting to see, if it's been done, the calculated impact of each of those, actually numerically, because looking through this, I mean, it's a very long, really detailed report, but I think there are probably only 2 or 3 times that the impact of any of this is actually explained using numbers, and one is the introduction of the station, South Cambridgeshire Station. But the only other number that appears is the total number of reduced then car journeys if we do the whole lot. And so it would be really interesting to see the breakout numerically of the impact, even on the kind of larger things that appear on the page 88 impact chart, which is great to see visually. But again, if we could have some feel as to the actual impact that each of those are going to have individually and collectively, I think that whoever is going to be going through and doing the prioritization, it helps a lot. Otherwise, I think us as assembly members are able to make a lot of subjective input, but probably isn't going to be, very useful in the long run.
Thank you very much. Councillor Topping.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I've just got one observation and one question. So the observation is about Royal Papworth. Now, in the same way that Cambridge University, which is a global phenomenon, so Cambridge University, it seems to me, it recognises that it also has a duty of care to Cambridge itself, or it's moving in that direction. And it seems to me that Royal Papworth, although it's a national institution, equally has a requirement and a need to engage with the city in which it is now going to be located. And I think, calling these large institutions to step up to the plate is quite important. I'm sure they'll be willing, but it's important to recognise that. And the question is around Cambridge South, and if you look at the report, it says, well, Network Rail, Department of Transport, the Combined Authority, GCP, everyone's got a little bit of this, and I think it's naive to say, well, who's on point for Cambridge South? But I think it is important for there to be some really clear governance and accountability in terms of who is driving forward Cambridge South. Otherwise, it will just go round and round and round. Thank you.
Right. No, very very helpful. And Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Chair. Yesterday, the GCP launched its consultation on choices for better journeys, and I would welcome. I'm very unclear reading this where the impact of actions coming out of that exercise would fit into what we're looking at here. We were talking in that other exercise of trying to reduce private car journeys by 25% in the city, and this is in the city. So are we looking at a picture here through this report which already accounts for us having achieved that, or is achieving that something that we can expect to contribute towards solving the problem? And I'd be interested to have Peter's comment on the degree of impact that that might be, or accepting that the choices for better journeys options include things that have varying levels of impact, but clearly a significant impact is hoped for, and so it would be good to understand how the CBC would be impacted by that.
Thank you very much. And my only contribution is I was slightly cautious that the only demand management option which had been incorporated in any of the modelling here was parking control, and of course there are other potential demand management options under discussion. And in terms of this 47 suggestions in one of the appendices, I suspect there may once have been 48, because items 28 and 30 cross-reference each other with a step change from 29 and 31. So it could be that was a previous one that has been struck out, or the order's been changed. Anyway, I did it about. Who would like to answer some of these questions? Oh, yeah, you have your own.
Thank you, Chair. Right. So in absolutely no particular order. So the question at the end around demand management, and I think actually the Chair's partially answered that. It is partially captured in the report because the report only looks at parking restraint. So if following the engagement that's going on at the moment, we took forward wider demand management, it would contribute and improve the position as reflected in this report, rather than the other way round. In terms of rural Papworth Hospital and the CBC partners are contributing to a new bus service that starts imminently in terms of their move. In terms of Cambridge South, I would echo the need around the champion, but I think where we are with Cambridge South now is we have a very clear development plan that the funding partners are holding Department for Transport and Network Rail to account. We have a timeline around that plan, so instead of talking around a station, talking tends not to get things delivered. We have a delivery plan that says, let's develop the design, let's develop the funding options, let's understand exactly the infrastructure requirements of the rail line itself, which is the tricky bit. We will then get a final report in good time to say how do we take that forward. So I think it's incumbent at the moment on all the funding partners, GCP, Combined Authority, and Andy from AstraZeneca to make sure we deliver to the timescale we've promised, and then for the public sector bodies to take that scheme forward. Impact analysis, Heather, exists. It's in the 300 pages. So we will bring that out as part of the next steps for the priority to order. The origin and destination also exists. There's an element of confidentiality about that, but that will guide some of the decision making on the priority schemes. Councillor Solomon will get you the information on the clarity around the CAM question, and also Liverpool Street. I'm confident it's in there, but I'll just double check before I give you an answer. So then in terms of the priority question, and then in terms of John Wells's question around the clarity and the delivery plans, that absolutely is the next step in terms of saying what really matters over the next 2, 3, 4 years, and then what of the 47 are the real game changers, and how do we ensure that we buttonhole someone with leading that and we come forward with delivery plans. Some of these things are already in train, so some of the work on expansion at Junction 11. Some of the work has started around Cambridge South Station, but others we clearly need to seek volunteers for and get delivery time frame around that. And I think that will be a key discussion point at the Executive Board Chair around saying, okay, this is all terribly nice, but what happens next, and how we give reassurance. Absolutely echo Andy's point around the partnership working, and I think also that the bit that I did miss was about the residents. We've got discussions with residents coming up next month, and that will be an important, which looking forward to, and that will be an important consideration as to how we collectively take this forward. Helen will particularly take the issue around the cycleways as an issue, and we'll feed that in. And then I think in terms of Councillor Massey and Councillor Wilson, you're almost saying a similar thing around some of this is about service provision and about cost of services in terms of the availability of buses if you're in Cottenham, or the cost of buses services and that very much fits with the work that we commenced yesterday around saying we simply can't build our way out of this because there just isn't the land in the area, nor would we want to because of the impact on our communities. We have to look at service provision overlaying that to give that real alternative. So I think that work will continue. And hopefully I've captured most of the main points, Chair, but if I missed anything,
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm gratified as a resident of the village that the phrase "the Cottenham question" has become code for how does this work. How does this work for our residents of our villages? It's a bit like how does this play in Peoria? Right. Okay. So we've had a request for a short break, and I'm going to suggest that we start gathering again at 4:05, if that's enough. I know that means it's almost certainly going to be 4:10 before we're all ready to start, but I'm saying, can we please start gathering again at 4:05? need no introduction, Mike. Straight to you. Just missing Councillor Topping, who's always got something else to be doing. Little huddle going on in the corner there. Right then. Are you off? Right then. Yes, members, if you could resume your seats and we'll get back on with the agenda. There are three quite important items here. Well, that's not to say that any item is unimportant, but these are big projects and possibly controversial. So we start with item 10, the Chisholm Trail. I, for one, am glad it still holds that title. And we're going to hear a presentation from the officer, and then we're going to have a discussion about it. And I'm going to move straight to Mike Davis, who is sitting there. Thank you very much. You have a microphone, don't you?
Yep. Thank you, Chair. Well, I'll be very brief, given the time. So I think it would be very useful in the report, actually, to go straight to the last plan in the pack, Appendix 3. So that gives a pretty good summary of where we are with the Chisholm Trail. We've just had some discussion about routes to the Biomedical campus and Addenbrooks, and the Chisholm Trail does offer this a reliable, fast journey across the east side of the city, potentially linking into Waterbeach and the northern villages and the northern busway, heading south, linking green spaces into Romsey, Abbey Ward, and onwards to the cycle scheme we built on Hills Road, which then takes you to the Biomedical campus. Phase 1 is now underway. Next week will be the official sod cutting ceremony, and there's been an awful lot of work to get to this point. It has been a very challenging project and a very difficult site, lots of issues to resolve in planning, lots of landowner type issues, so it's a great milestone to reach this point. And also good news that phase 2 is effectively kicking off as part of the network rail works that we've already heard about at Mill Road. That will deliver us a section of phase 2. So the whole project is at last moving forward. So perhaps I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Yes, I particularly enjoyed reading the report, and especially paragraph 2.6. I liked the references to the Promenade Plantée in Paris, New York's High Line, and the recently opened 606 in Chicago. All I would flag up is that the scheme is more expensive than originally estimated, but that's a matter for others to decide. Members, do we have any points, observations, questions? Councillor Kavanagh.
I notice that the section that's on Newmarket Road, I think there's been a change from the original plan, which I think was to have the underpass kind of pre-constructed and then slid under the road over a weekend. But I think from reading this, there's been a change in that plan, and that there'll be a need for more closures. That was one thing I just mentioned. The other thing is the route, phase 2 route, believes it's going to go down connecting to the current central station, and currently cyclists in particular have great difficulty in, say, getting from the Carter Bridge to the southern part of the busway, the cycle route there. but it's virtually impossible to go across the front of the station because of the taxi rank and the configuration there and so on. So I was just wondering if there are any plans to actually make it easier for cyclists to get from the Carter Bridge side across to this southern part of the busway cycle route. I suppose, I think I know the answer, but I'll wait for you to tell me it.
Any other questions before we get an answer to those two? Yes, Councillor Vick, yeah.
There has been discussion about the possibility of a bridge between the Ridgeons site and the Mill Road depot site, and I wondered if that's still likely to be part of the scheme. And I have seen suggestions that the cycleway through the Mill Road depot site was going to be confined to a rather narrow walled corridor, and I wonder whether that is still the case or whether that's changed as well.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? Okay, so 3 questions.
Right, thank you. Yeah, the underpass, as I say, the original plan was to build the underpass on the lake side and then sort of roll it into place over a weekend. Actually, due to the presence of lizards, the working space that we have available is a lot less than we'd hoped for. So we're now actually looking at a precast concrete option where the underpass arrives in about 16 sections, and the sections are each individually sort of put in place by a crane. That does actually increase the time that Newmarket Road would need to be closed for. However, it's likely that it could be done with two-way working, so it wouldn't be a complete closure for the whole period. We are looking at when exactly we would do that, but it's likely to be a school holiday or half term, something like that. In terms of the station frontage, the project doesn't at the moment include anything on the station frontage, but just to say that the section we hope to be delivered this summer on the other side, on the Romsey side, does give a sort of eastern link, so it may mean that some of those through trips aren't actually having to go on the station side, and they're staying on the Romsey side, if you like. The Ridgeons to Mill Road bridge isn't in the current plan. I mean, it's never really been part of the project, but it is something that was being looked at one time. The railway corridor is particularly wide at that point. It's an electrified rail line, so you would need a bridge that would clear the electrified rail line. It would be quite a significant structure, probably costing well over £15 million. And because of the need to clear the electrified rail line, you'd need quite long ramps either side of it as well. And that would be quite difficult to land the ramps actually on both sides. So that's not part of the current project. There will be the Chisholm Trail as part of the City Depot development. It's going alongside the development, but I think it's a 5 metre wide corridor that's been agreed, and it does have an open fence on one side of it. As for the other details on the sort of development side, I think I'd have to just check the current planning application, but it should be sort of properties on that side. So 5 metres is pretty generous, and as I say, you'll have an open fence on one side looking across the rail corridor, so it shouldn't feel too enclosed. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, okay, thank you very much. Helpful answers to those questions. I've been long enough in this game to know that I mustn't make any pejorative references to reptiles. And that takes us on to item 11, which is the Milton Road bus cycling and walking improvements final design. We're going to start by hearing feedback from the local liaison forum. And I know that Yes, she is there, yes. We're then going to move on to the public questions. We're then going to have a response from the officer to those questions and the LLF feedback. And then he's going to move into presenting the report, and then we're going to have our discussion. So is your microphone working, Jocelyn? Yes.
Is it? Yes, that's right, yes. Thank you. We appreciate being able to present from the Local Liaison Forum. Thank you. There are two resolutions that have come out of the Local Liaison Forum, and I'd like to refer to those first, and then just to go briefly into several other matters. The first resolution is that the Local Liaison Forum request that a biodiversity strategy for Milton Road be put to the Greater Cambridge Partnership Assembly and Board along with a detailed design. The second resolution is that the Local Liaison Forum seeks assurance that any substantial changes to the scheme will be presented to the Local Liaison Forum to review and to scrutinise prior to their presentation to the Greater Cambridge Partnership Assembly and Board. Those two resolutions, I think, speak for themselves, but I would like to say in relation to the first that at the last discussion of the Local Liaison Forum, there was considerable concern about biodiversity and the importance of that, and the importance of incorporating it into the whole of the Greater Cambridge Partnerships projects. As we are only Milton Road, we put it forward for Milton Road, but with the notion that it's important for the whole of the scheme, of the Greater Cambridge Partnership schemes. As to the second one, it's simply that the Local Liaison Forum is appreciative of the fact that we have been involved all the way along from the time that the Local Liaison Forum was originally set up. However, there is always the question as to whether there might be changes to the project that's gone forward out of the Local Liaison Forum, that is, with its involvement, and therefore if there is any substantial change, it's natural that the Local Liaison Forum would like to be able to review and scrutinise that before it goes to the Assembly and the Board. Now, as to several other matters that I would simply like to raise, though the Local Liaison Forum and the residents who've been attending are generally very happy, I think I can say, with the scheme as it's been developed, and that stands to reason because it has been developed on the basis of what the Local Liaison Forum put forward. But there are still just several small concerns which I have a responsibility to raise. There is a concern that's been raised by some residents about parts of the pedestrian, the footpath that are dual use. Now, the dual use part has been shortened, but some residents are expressing concern about dual use. We have been assured that there's been a safety audit, and that with the shortening of that, this should lessen the concerns. There's also continuing concerns from some residents about the floating bus stops, and we have been assured there that there will be slight raising of the cycleway as the cycleway goes into the floating bus stop, and that there'll also be textured surfaces that warn cyclists that they're coming into a floating bus stop, as well as notices and so forth. There is concerns about the parking down at the Mitcham's Corner shops, because we want the shops to survive, and they of course need pedestrians coming and cyclists coming, but it's inevitable that some people will come there in cars, and so that's been an issue and continues to be one. But we also do want to emphasise that we want to retain the potential for trees that is already built into the scheme. There's also the Gilbert Road intersection. There were concerns raised about when cyclists come out going left into Milton Road. At present, they have a tendency to come across the footpath, and therefore people raise the problem or the issue of potential collision with pedestrians standing waiting to cross. And there may be able to be some modifications to that, but at present that is the case, and I'm touching wood that there aren't well, there haven't been accidents at that point. And the other, I think those are the main concerns, and there's still the continuing concern of the bus lane, which, I mean, it's inevitable that the residents are raising the bus lane and the length, and that there is a bus lane. On the other hand, I think there is also an appreciation on the part of the residents that the scheme has to be able to conform to the principles on which the funding is being given, and that there's pedestrian priority, there's cycling priority, and there has to be some consideration given to bus priority. But I do have a responsibility to raise the fact that the length of the bus lanes is a concern, although we also appreciate that one of the bus lanes is shorter than in the existing configuration. That is the configuration existing right now. Now, there are some really positive aspects that I just did want to raise too, and that is that we're so pleased that the shops at the junction of Milton Road and Arbury Road, that there is good discussion going on between the officers from the Greater Cambridge Partnership and the shop owners there, because it has a potential to be a really like a boulevard almost at that point, and that there's already a coffee shop and other shops there that make it attractive to residents. And if, as the officers are discussing with the shop owners, the potential for trees and other aspects, I think that's a really welcome aspect of the scheme. There's another one, which is the issue of Woodhead Drive. And I have to say, when I first stood for the council back in 2012, for the 2013 election, going down to that area, there's a lot of greenery, there are trees and so on, but there's also a need for something to uplift it. And the fact that Woodhead Drive will be now an avenue of trees is a really positive outcome of this scheme, as of course is the fact that Milton Road will be an avenue of trees, with trees having been considered by the resident, the type of trees. But coming back to Woodhead Drive, there's a real problem there of coaches parking, and now that there will be trees on either side, hopefully that will mean that the coaches are less likely to park there, because the ambience is changed. And there are just two other issues I'd like to raise. One is the issue of buses stopping. What residents want is that if there are going to be buses coming down here and bus lanes, then we actually want the buses to stop. Now, of course, this is not something that the Greater Cambridge Partnership can order, but it is important that the bus companies be spoken with so that they're getting value out of this scheme, and the residents should have a quid pro quo. If the bus companies are getting value, the residents should have the value that the buses stop more often down Milton Road. As people said, if there's a bus lane there and the buses aren't stopping for us, what's the point of the buses coming down Milton Road? We know they're coming down for the people outside Cambridge, but we want them to actually count for the people who live in Cambridge too. And perhaps the final point I wanted to raise is one that it was raised before in a question by a resident, Maureen Mace, before the Greater Cambridge Partnership Board, and the Greater Cambridge Partnership Board did accede to it, and this was the whole question of public art along Milton Road. So, as I say, the board did say yes to that, and both for Milton Road and for the Histon Road project, the residents had determined that we do need public art on both those roads. Therefore, I would suggest to the Assembly that this issue be restated to the board, and that it be noted that there must be an indicative budget set for the public art along Milton Road, and, if I might add, along Histon Road. Now I come to the final point, and this is the issue of mitigation and parking for residents. This was the issue that at the last local liaison forum did raise some if we might put it this way, differences of opinion. But there was one opinion that was solid, and that is, amongst everybody there, that the parking is a real issue along in this area, that with the parking spaces going from Milton Road, there has to be mitigation, that there's still a problem for a resident who is on her boundary comes into the Elizabeth Way roundabout area, and she is concerned about this. The residents of the Hurst Park area are concerned that when the spaces go from Milton Road, there will be cars coming into their area and so on. There are three areas here in this part. It's really the part from Elizabeth Way roundabout down to Mitcham's Corner. It involves an area that's called Asham, which is the Gilbert Road, Carlton Way area with the library in it, and that already has a residence parking scheme has been approved on it. There's an area that's called Elizabeth that is the other side of Milton Road, between Milton Road and Chesterton Road, and that area is concerned, the residents are concerned about their position, because with the residents parking going in at Asham, the parking bays going from Milton Road, they are concerned that they will not have enough room for parking in their own area. And then, as I mentioned, there's also the Hurst Park estate area. We, the councillors of the whole area, are endeavouring to come together. We're already communicating with each other. That's Councillor Ian Manning, who's the councillor for Chesterton, Councillor Claire Richards, who's the councillor for Castle, myself, who's the councillor for Arbury. Those are the three county councillors involved. Then Councillor Mike Sargent, who's a city councillor, Councillor Jamie Dell, who is a city councillor, and Councillor Damien Tunnicliffe, who's a city councillor. And we're endeavouring to come together to cooperate on issues that affect our areas. However, what I would say is this, and I'm making a plea to the Assembly, that in order to resolve this problem of mitigation involving residents parking, would it be possible for the Greater Cambridge Partnership to get together, all us as councillors, the county officers who deal with residents parking, the Greater Cambridge Partnership officers who are dealing with the Milton Road project, to actually discuss how mitigation might be implemented in this area in conjunction with the residents and all the councillors and the relevant officers together, because I think that without this, the problem simply superates. It's there, it's got to be dealt with, and the whole area has to be dealt with, because if we leave Hurst Park Hurst Park Estate out, for example, they will be impacted by the parking spots going from Milton Road, and the concerns of their residents have to be taken into account, just as the concerns of the residents in what we call the Elizabeth area, the Asham area, and perhaps even the Victoria area, which is on the other side of Mitcham's Corner. So it's not a resolution, I emphasise that, it's not a resolution of the local liaison forum. It's a suggestion that I, as the chair, put, because we as councillors are coming together and the residents need to come together for this whole area. And finally, I just emphasise, if the Greater Cambridge Partnership could call together a meeting, a workshop, so that this can be discussed. And the officers are essential to it, because they know what the rules are, they know what can and can't be done, and residents can inform them, they can inform residents, and a constructive conversation, as they say, could come out of this with some positive outcomes for the Greater Cambridge Partnership, for the Milton Road project, and for the residents of the area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. An eloquent and comprehensive report, as always. And before I let you go, Jocelyn, members don't engage in the discussion, but are there any questions of clarification you would like to put before I allow Jocelyn to stand down? No. Thank you very much. much appreciated. Okay, that brings us to the public questions, and we have 5 listed. However, I have to point out that the first questioner, Sarah Langford, is not able to be present. So I'll just summarise briefly what she is concerned about. She raises some concerns, particularly about antisocial behaviour that might be attracted by benches in a particular location, and 1 or 2 other points which, of course, officers will be taking away and considering very carefully. That brings us then to Maureen Mace. Jocelyn referred to her already, but she has a question she would like to put to us today. Are you happy to sit where you are? Yes?
Yes, fine.
Thank you very much. Off you go.
The Milton Road plans are almost complete, and I understand that the works will start in April 2020. This coincides with the time our beautiful cherry trees blossom. I would like to know if this spring is the last time we see this glorious display, or whether it will be next year. I'd also like to know the dates when the trees will be chopped down, as many people travelling along the road will be very disappointed. I would like to acknowledge and publicise this event by putting pink ribbons on the trees, and also discreet notices to say that they will be chopped down and the reason why, and also to say that they will be replaced by an avenue of new trees. I believe this will lessen the blow to those who do not expect it and do not know they will be replaced. In order for this to happen, I would like to be given at least a month's notice of the removal of the trees and an agreement that the ribbons and notices will not be removed. I ask this because the ribbons were cut down twice before, and no one can tell me why, but I did find out that one time was prior to the arrival of Prince Charles, and the other time when Jeremy Corbyn visited. But of course, it may not have been the reason why they were taken down. So I would like an assurance to the Milton Road Residents Association that this will not happen again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll get answers to all these questions in a minute. Next questioner is Barbara Taylor.
Right.
Thank you. Yes.
Right. We are very pleased that as a whole the landscaping design as shown at the Milton Road Local Liaison Forum for Milton Road looks amazing. The concern is that if the costs of the roadworks overrun, there will be sufficient money left in the budget for the landscaping as it was presented. Can you confirm that specific funding sufficient to achieve the landscaping design has been set aside for the landscaping, or if there is an overspend on roadworks, that extra money will be found? Also, can you assure us that the trees to be planted along the length of the road will be semi-mature, as promised following the last July's Executive Board meeting, where in response to a question the answer was officers confirmed that a commitment has been made to replant semi-mature trees along the length of Milton Road, and that the City Council arborist has advised that in general terms the girth of the new trees should not exceed 16 to 18 centimetres. We'd like them wider, obviously, in order that the trees have the best chance to establish and survive. Officers will work with the City Council arborists to carefully specify the size maturity of each species of tree that is chosen in order to achieve the stated aims. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The fourth question is from Erik de Visser. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. If not.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to ask the following question to the Joint Assembly of the Guildhall. Recently, the road works at Green End Road caused miles-long queues due to temporary traffic lights. Although these were scheduled to be in place for 2 weeks, the resulting chaos led to them being removed a week early. However, during that week, the air quality was toxic. Drivers were behaving badly, trying to overtake stationary traffic, buses were running late, and cyclists were diverted because the lights were put out in the cycle lanes, and the residents found it difficult to breathe and to get anywhere if they had to use a car. The roadworks on Milton Road are estimated to a minimum of 18 months. I would like to ask the GCP, how it aims to stop these problems, which can cause significant health issues from poor air quality and stress from recurring. Since I wrote this question, I read this week that the GCP says 106 deaths every year can be attributed to poor air quality. How are you going to prevent any further death because of idling engines on Milton Road while the roadworks are going on? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the final question on my list is from Michael Page.
Yes, good afternoon. On previous occasions when I've asked questions of the Assembly and Board, I've focused on how do we measure success with any given project, before and after. Last time I asked a question, it was to do with modal shift, although I don't think that's going to work from an earlier answer I heard today. So this time I'm focusing on air quality, which I believe is an objective of these projects. And in the preamble to my question that I've written, I just point out that there is technology available, not like these 2 metre by 1 metre cabinets that we see, but much smaller devices which are about the size of a football, and which were pioneered in many ways by Cambridge University Department of Chemistry. And they had trials here in 2016, 2017. And I've just read the other day that the Mayor of London has got this project called Breathe London, and he is deploying 100 of these self-same sensors in London. So as one of the objectives is to improve air quality, I'd like to know whether we could consider the possibility of monitoring air quality before the construction phase, during the construction phase, and after the construction phase, so we can figure out, did we actually achieve something in that regard? And maybe even better, if we could bring it to the public's attention, get their interest, if we could perhaps have a smartphone app where people could monitor it for themselves and see trend over time. Even better, perhaps, a roadside display to bring it to everybody's attention. And then finally, wouldn't it be nice if we could mark the success of our project by having a piece of public art where such a roadside display was somehow integrated into that piece of public art? So finally, I guess the formal question is, will the Assembly recommend to the Executive Board that plans are put in place for air quality monitoring before, during and after the construction phase, and if it's necessary, allocate additional budget for this purpose? Furthermore, could the data be processed and displayed in some easy way to make it available to the public?
Thank you very much. You mentioned air quality in London there, and I'm sure members are aware that the ultra-low emission zone comes into effect in London on the 8th of April, and we often look to London as a model for such things. I'll just say that without any comment. Right, so there we are. Over to you, Peter. You start by responding to Jocelyn, and then the questions, and then lead us off into the...
Thank you, Chair. So just to try and go through the points that were raised, in terms of the resolutions, officers would have no objections to them. Clearly it's a board decision, but we wouldn't be responding to that. And we would be happy to facilitate discussions around the parking. I mean, I think in previous joint assembly and executive boards, I've emphasised that parking remains an issue and we need to continue to work on it. So we're happy to support that. In terms of the questions, around the trees, we don't have a construction delivery plan yet. When we have one, we'll be talking it through with local residents. But as I sit here today, I don't imagine that this will be the last spring. I would imagine it will be after the bird nesting season next year. We're certainly happy to give the month's notice as required, and GCP will certainly not be going near any ribbons, so we will not be taking down. Well, just a point of caution: you need to be careful on the size of the notices, because the Highway Authority may well have a view on it. So, in terms of the landscaping budget, there isn't a specific budget, and nor in terms of good project management would I want to have a ring-fence budget for the landscaping. That said, we will deliver the landscaping as outlined. So I'm hoping that gives enough reassurance around how we will go about doing I think I've mentioned the traffic management plan previously. We recognise the importance in terms of the construction plan, in terms of mitigating all of the impacts around the traffic and delays in the area. And once we've started the process of developing one, we'll continue that engagement with the local community on that point. And we are exploring, Michael, the options for meaningful air quality measurements in the area. It can't be too big or can't be too local. We need to get that balance right. So, but we're exploring what we can do on that basis. Chair, there's not a great deal more I want to say about the report, other than just to perhaps say this has been some time in the gestation to get to this point. This has followed a series of consultations, not least the consultation at the end of last year. There have been 2 liaison forum sessions since that point. And we have been working with the local residents, the local community to incorporate the proposals as outlined before you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, members, over to you, and I'm going to start with Councillor Bick here.
Chair, I think members can't mistake the change of tone in discussing this project, because it wasn't always discussed so harmoniously as we've just seen with the contributions from the LLF and the questioners. And although it's not completely the end of the design process, I think I'd just like to congratulate the residents groups and other groups that have contributed to this, and also the officers who I think have been very accommodating to try and create a scheme that works to everyone's benefit. My own belief is that there are many good things in what we're looking at here, and in some sense it looks great on paper. I personally have always thought that the thing that's going to change the game as far as public transport down this corridor is going to be coming from the Choices for Better Journeys initiative that was launched as a conversation yesterday. I think that is probably the way to make the big change in that respect, not on trying to strain more bus lanes than are already there. The third point I wanted to make is, and I think Peter almost said this a moment ago, but I'd just like to check, that one of the questioners made the point about the recent experience in the area of roadworks, which were in fact much more modest than we're talking about with this scheme. And is there a willingness to commit a discussion with the LLF about how the construction phase is actually undertaken, and what provision is made for access, as well as taking into account the air quality issues?
Thank you very much. Councillor Kavanagh.
Yeah, I'd just like to draw attention to the illustration on page 113. This is really a detailed point, but I think it's a very important safety point. The number 5 there, you've got a reference to retaining the trees in the middle of the roundabout. Now, I've raised this, and a number of people have raised this a number of times about roundabouts in the city which have high foliage in the middle. I mean, they are, from a number of people's point of view, very dangerous, because when someone's thinking about entering the roundabout, particularly on a cycle, it's important that they can see the other side. Now, there are roundabouts in the city already where there are trees in the middle, and it's impossible to see across. I mean, for instance, there's the Perth Road, Cherry Hinton Road roundabout, for example. And so I'd just like to put in a plea that when the landscaping has been done here, that the trees are kept very low, if not taken away. because in reality it's inconsistent across the city, the way the roundabouts are treated. And for instance, you've got Fen Causeway, you've got it just got flat grass in the middle, we've got the 5 lamps roundabout. Yes, and other ones as well. You may find it amusing, but it's not. You try and cross a roundabout and you can't see what's coming, particularly if they're exceeding the speed limit, the cars coming on the roundabout. So I just raised that and check it out with the safety team. Thanks.
Right, thank you. Anyone else want to make any contribution? Can I just tease out then, because I possibly wasn't paying attention, Peter, when you were giving your response again. The question of biodiversity, did you cover that?
Chair, I think we said that officers would have no objection to that resolution. I mean, clearly, it's not for officers to decide to accept it. That would be for decision makers. But we certainly won't be putting up any objections to that.
Right then, and I was struck by the sort of urge that the GCP should incorporate a concern for biodiversity across all its projects. Is that something that you say would you admit to not being paying attention to biodiversity? I thought we generally did.
I would suggest that we do, Chair. I would think this is a particular example on an individual scheme, and it would be very useful to then reflect on that as we take individual schemes forward.
Right, thank you. And then the Jocelyn suggested the Assembly should restate residents' desire for public art along the scheme. Where do we stand on that?
We've agreed to continue to hold those discussions with local residents. Public art is something that generates a lot of interest on both sides of the divide, Chair, and so I think we've committed to continue with those discussions, and we look forward to our local representatives leading them, and we'll happily hold on to their codes as they do so.
Right then, and I think I picked up that you did offer to work together with local councillors on trying to resolve the car parking mitigation. Excellent. So members, are you generally do you generally back that notion of encouraging public art along the route? You might be raising that again at the executive board. I'm getting nods in general, right? So I'll specifically mention that. So my impression was that generally speaking, that was favourably received, and as Councillor Bick said, looks good on paper. Proof is in the implementation. Good luck. Well, of course, not our job, but it was the executive board.
Thank you. Just a couple of comments in terms of the questions. So there will be engagement on the construction plan, and I think we need to be clear there will be difficult decisions on how you balance the construction plan. So the longer you work per day, the less days it requires you to deliver it, but obviously that you need to balance that with the views of local residents and local communities. So that's one of the reasons why there's a very real need to hold those discussions. And I think Councillor Kavanagh raises an interesting point about the foliage, and I have to say, having been an engineer for 20 odd years, and the sort of the general dislike by engineers of anything tree related anywhere near the highway, speed and approaching roundabouts is a very polarized conversation. People like to be able to see everything at the roundabout because that means they can approach it at a faster speed. And it's about getting that balance right. There are an awful lot of new roundabouts devised now where you deliberately cannot see across the roundabout, so you have to slow down. But I think he's absolutely right about ensuring we engage with road safety colleagues. That's happened thus far and will continue through the process.
Right, yes, sorry, that was a very useful observation on the height of foliage across roundabouts. Does it encourage speeding vehicles or make cyclists reluctant to cross them? Something for further discussion. Okay, that was item 11, the Milton Road bus cycling and walking improvements final design. Over to the Executive Board, and that brings us to item 12, which is rural travel hubs. So we're going to have some local member input. I may be giving that myself, I think, am I? Or have we got some local members here? Local local-ish. Then we're going to receive the officer presentation, and then we're going to have the joint assembly debate. So I'm so sorry. Thank you. I'm glad I reminded you at the beginning to hold me up if I were starting to drift off towards the end of the meeting, which clearly I am. Councillor Solomon has had a puncture and has to retrieve his bicycle from the bicycle repair shop before it closes, so that explains why he's left us at this point. So the local member input, my understanding was just to refer to the, I think these papers have been circulated to us all, the statement from Oakington Parish Council, which sets out its position, in particular in relation to the number of car parking places that would be appropriate. Councillor Wilson may wish to come in then on that particular item, and then I don't think we have any specific local member input, but we do have members with local with some knowledge of local issues relating to this item. And since I flagged up as item 1 on my list, I think I will let the local members have the say first, and then we'll have the officer presentation. So, Councillor Wilson, if you want to speak at this point, please do.
Thank you. I've a couple of points. First of all, I really want to understand which residents this scheme is intended to serve, because at the moment all I can see it serving is Oakington, which is already quite close to the guided busway, and for many people within walking distance. So the question of whether there is parking or not parking becomes academic. There is no straightforward transport from any of the other villages unless people can cycle, if there's the cycle path. That extra transport from local villages, and I hesitate to mention Cottenham, but Cottenham is a local village, Rampton, that would solve a problem for many people in those villages, and also would make this truly a hub, because a hub that doesn't have several spokes, for me, is not a hub. Hence, if you look at a bicycle wheel, you have several spokes going into it, and that's a hub. There are many people who travel from even further north of Cottenham, from Haddenham, Wilburton, who come down through, and even Witcham Toll, who come down through Cottenham, through Oakington to travel into Cambridge. And I think many of them would like to have a public transport route that means they don't have to drive those long distances every day and put up with traffic or whatever. And if there aren't parking spaces, and if people are made to feel unwelcome about using the travel hub, then they will carry on driving through Oakington. So I would say that one of the gains that this consultation has achieved is actually to set village against village, and I think that's quite sad, because I've never seen anything happen like this, where it looks like Oakington want to set up the People's Republic of Oakington, that they don't want other people from other villages going into their village. And I think this is quite sad, because I don't think that was ever the intention, but it seems to be what it achieves. So I think there needs to be something more, and there's nothing on this paper about the comments from the people of Cottenham. So, and I'm sure a lot of people, of residents, did tell me that they had responded to this consultation, and they had the similar concerns about how were they going to get to the travel hub. So I would like to give an invitation to members of the Greater Cambridge Partnership Assembly and say, come and stand with me at the end of Oakington Road in Cottenham, and imagine that you have to get to the rural travel hub to get onto a guided bus, and work out how you're going to get there, because unless you're a cyclist, you're not going to. So what is the objective of having this rural travel hub in that place? Thank you.
Thank you. Bearing in mind I'm still not opening the debate, but I think it's only fair of me to refer to County Councillor Peter Hudson, who represents Oakington Westwick, amongst other villages in his division, and he does back the position set out by Oakington and Westwick Parish Council, and he makes the claim that there is the intention to have a cycleway between Oakington and Cottenham, and he goes on to make the claim that those in Cottenham to whom we've spoken about the possibility of a rural travel hub in Oakington say they would love to go and be able to park there, but if they couldn't park there, they would go by bicycle. So I just leave that hanging, don't get engaged with the debate on that. Any other members with local connections want to speak at this point? Yes, Councillor Topping.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, given the hour, I'll be brief, because the Whittlesford, I mean, it's not now a travel hub, it's now a sort of master planning round the station. I think that the issue with the release of the Stage 2 report literally just before Christmas, which seemed to invite comment by the end of January, sort of set a number of hairs running, and that was unfortunate. But I'm reassured by the officer who now is the sort of project officer for this, and who was at Whittlesford Parish Council and fielded a lot of concerns pretty ably. So I'd urge you to hang on to that particular chap. I mean, my point is that I mean, we talked about Stansted Airport earlier. So Whittlesford Station has increased in terms of passenger journeys by 100,000 in 5 years, so it's now up to 500,000 a year. So it is important that there is some master planning of that station. I think it's absolutely critical that, you know, obviously the local community is involved. The local community is very concerned, not least by the illustration of a 2 or 3 story car park next to the historic Duxford Chapel, which, you know, if I was producing that plan, I'd have probably said let's not use that illustration, because it's just acting as a lightning rod for, you know. However, clearly something does have to be done around Whittlesford Station, and if we are not going to move the station to Sawston and start again with a sort of greenfield site, then let's do this work on the master planning of Whittlesford Station. But let's do it with people locally. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Williams, do you want to make a contribution as a locally interested member?
Well, I just want to ask the question of the officer who can answer it while he's covering those other points. I see in the Oakington proposal that Stagecoach have agreed to extend the 6 to the travel hub. Have they also agreed to extend the 7 from Sawston to Whittlesford Station? Do you know, have you approached them about that once we introduce the bus turning circle?
Right then, let's come to that in the officer presentation. I suppose I also live in Cottenham, so as a member with a local interest, I was struck by your phrase, Councillor Wilson, that a hub without spokes isn't a hub. I think that's a good one. I will throw that to the Executive Board. And my only comment on Stagecoach's offer to extend the 6 to the travel hub was that they said that in doing so they would do that in place of serving Oakington High Street, and I thought that was penny pinching. I think that I can't unsee why the Stagecoach can't carry on running the bus through Oakington High Street, do the very short diversion to the travel hub, turn around there and go off. But that's my local contribution over, and if we can invite the officer to introduce the report, we'll then throw the discussion over into the rest of the
Thank you, Chair. Before I forget, they have offered to extend the 7. So there's 2 parts to the report. The first part that is a sort of the rural travel hubs, and I think we need to try and give this a little bit of context. This is not the silver bullet. This is not the answer to all the ills of transport from the rural villages into the Cambridge area. This is whether we can achieve some local solutions that will offer benefit to local communities. We've certainly not tried to put parish against parish. Normally it's parishes against us, frankly, but it's what we've been trying to do is to come forward with something we can deliver relatively quickly, that has broad levels of support that might offer some genuine local benefit. So this isn't going to, we're not talking about huge numbers. We are, I mean, I recognise the point about wheel and spoke. I mean, an awful lot of this does hang together on improving public transport, which, you know, we've talked about sort of previously, because if you were looking at a whole scale improvement on public transport, hubs become incredibly important for a whole host of very different reasons. So the report just outlines where we've got to with a pilot project, with a concept project, and it says that in Oakington there are some proposals there. There's a discussion to be had about whether or not it includes parking. In Sawston, actually, there seems to be less appetite for that, and I think we need to reflect, and policymakers need to reflect on going with the grain rather than anything else. So I think there's a decision to be made around whether the Oakington is taken forward, or whether we do it on a staged approach, and you know how we wish to deal with the parking issue particularly. And I do take the point around the 6 and not sort of taking from one part of Oakington to do it to deliver improvements somewhere else, because that doesn't quite feel that doesn't fit doesn't fit well. So I think we need to go back around that loop. Whittlesford, I think, is quite a different issue in terms of the growth of patronage that Councillor Toppings alluded to. The traffic issues in that area anyway are you know, very pronounced and are not going to get any better anytime soon. I think we released the report for comment because we had it. Yeah, you know, in terms of trying to I think the term is deliver at pace. The report was concluded, and we involved stakeholders hitherto, so why not ask them for some comments in advance of any public consultation? But I think the report does set a bit more of a context around that area. There are some thorny issues in there that will need to be tested, and I think the sort of merging proposal is to say, whilst we've had some stakeholder feedback, we need a formal public consultation on that, because there are some difficult decisions that need to be taken, and certainly we would be encouraging the executive board to take it forward on that basis. I hope that's enough of an overview, Chair, in terms of taking it forward.
Thank you, Robert. So, members, yes, Councillor Kavanagh, yes.
Can I just make an observation? Although I live in the city, I actually know Oakington area. I cycle up there quite often, and I think one of the best decisions made in recent years related to Oakington is the removal of one of the spokes, if you want to use that analogy. You know, the cut-through road that goes from Longstanton Road around the airfield. Well, they closed that off. I mean, it was illegal for cars to be racing across there. Now that's become a joy for people to walk along and cycle along. By a simple decision, blocking off the road to stop cars cutting through illegally.
Right, yes. I'm not going there. It was very controversial, particularly with residents of Longstanton. Right, Dr. Williams.
Thank you, Councillor. So about 6 hours ago, and if it was, we started off the meeting with suggested criteria for prioritisation of new schemes. I don't understand how the rural travel hubs would fit into that prioritisation of new schemes. In our world, we'd call this. I think these rural travel hubs are just a strategic distraction. I mean, I think we could go too far with our Stansted analogy, but if this was a Stansted discussion about Stansted Airport, and we'd be talking about 38 car parking spaces, it's just not what we should be doing. So I'd be focusing on places where we can make a step change. So Foxton, yes or no, a lot of car parking space there. I'd put Whittlesford into that category as well, but from my understanding of the scheme, it looks like it's more about tidying things up and getting rid of the people parking on yellow lines, W lines. Tell me you're going to double the size of Whittlesford car park, then I think it's a scheme. But places that are crying out for travel hubs, like Camborne, where there isn't one at all, seem to be much higher priority for us. So although I understood why ages ago we wrote out asking who fancies a rural travel hub, I think they're small, they're a distraction, they're going to wind up the local community, and we should just focus on things which are going to make a step change in our ambition.
So resisting temptation, talk about the capacity point which Dr. Williams has referred to there. I think there is just one other point if we're talking rural travel hubs generally, and I do think there's a completely different story between Oakington and Whittlesford in terms of scale, and that's one of credibility. We're trying to draw people into our city or allow them to get into our city in different ways. We're considering projects of this nature to do one on a simple parochial basis rather than actually it's serving an area and a community in the wider area. And it's more than just Cottenham, of course, in that particular area. I think the same would apply to other travel hubs. To give them any credibility, they need to look like a way for people to interchange with public transport to get into the city.
Yes, I just wanted to ask the question about the relationship of this hub concept with the extent of the bus network, because it seems to me that you need to define where your hubs are when you've got a settled state for what the network that it's part of serves. And you know, I would worry that we would invest a lot in some hubs which, if we succeed in extending the network, resulting, I say again, on the Choices for Better Journeys exercise that we've got going on in parallel, that those hubs might not then be the right places. Where you're choosing to sort of filter people into the system would clearly depend on when we've got to the settled state of an extended network. And I'm just a bit wary about sort of picking off places based on what the network looks like now, which is, I think, clearly inadequate anyway.
Right then. So, Peter, do you want to comment on any of those points?
Not especially, Chairman. I think that there were very clear views, and obviously the Assembly would want to reflect them, I'm sure, to the Executive Board.
Yes, it was a bit of a downer, really, wasn't it, members? I know some local members are quite keen on the Oakington one, but generally speaking, not much enthusiasm. No one's challenging me on that point. Right. Okay. Right then. Well, that's that item. Thank you very much, and thank you all members for your endurance and staying the course. The date of the next meeting is the 6th of June, and it'll be the same time of day, 2 o'clock. But it's currently scheduled to be held in the council chamber at Camborne, South Cambridgeshire District Council. So thank you very much for your attendance, and wish you safe journeys home.